What if the Cullens were not alone when the Volturi came? What if, before the final confrontation, an old wizard followed the pull of death straight into Forks? Harry Potter has lived too long. He has seen wars, monsters, vampires, and magic the world forgot. But when he finds Bella, Edward, and Renesmee hidden in the rainy forests of Forks, he realizes one terrifying truth. The Volturi are coming, and this time, they are not just facing vampires, they are facing the master of death. Hey guys, welcome to the Vampire Harry. Here you will get best Twilight and Harry Potter what-ifs. Subscribe if you are new here. Also, set that bell notification to all, so whenever I post a video, you get the notification first. Now, without any further delay, let's dive into this crazy what-if.
The rain in Forks did not quite fall. It hung in the air, undecided, the way mist hangs over old graves when the world has nearly forgotten the names beneath them. Harry walked through it without hurry, the hood of his coat pushed back, droplets settling on his lashes and on the silvering hair at his temples that vanished again whenever he glanced at his reflection. The forest road sloped gently downward, slick with moss and last autumn's needles, and somewhere ahead the soft, persistent pull at the back of his sternum had grown stronger. He had learned, in the long years since he had earned his strange title, to trust the pull. It led him, more often than not, to places where death had grown impatient. He had been in the Pacific Northwest a fortnight, drifting down the coast from Vancouver, sleeping in a tent because the inns and the hostels had begun, after a century, to feel both familiar and faintly humiliating. He had been to Seattle for a single afternoon, only long enough to be jostled at a coffee bar and reminded why he avoided cities. The pull had grown sharpest only when he'd crossed the Olympic Peninsula border. By the time he reached the long, drowned-looking road to Forks, it had begun to ring against his ribs the way the Hallows had once rung when they had lain near each other in his pockets. A small, attentive vibration that did not so much warn as wonder. Something here was new. That was rare at his age. He paused beneath a great hemlock, set his rucksack against the trunk, and let the wand slide out of his sleeve into his palm. It was not the first wand he had ever owned, nor the second, nor the third, but he liked it for its weight and for the dark, lightning grain of its wood. The hawthorn had splintered beyond repair in 1948. The blackthorn he had carried after that had broken in a duel he did not like to remember. This one, made for him by an old Romanian wandmaker who had insisted on payment in the form of a single afternoon's conversation, suited him. He turned it once, idly, and let the spell unspool from his fingertips with the small, almost inaudible sigh of something well practiced. It was a finder. Not the kind that pointed, he had never trusted those. This one widened his hearing beyond the merely magical so that he could feel the shape of what walked these woods. What he heard made him still. The forest was alive in the ordinary way. There were elk moving along a ridge to the north, an owl, recently fed, settling above him in the hemlock's high branches, a stoat trying its luck along a deer trail. There was a witch's broom of a farmstead 2 miles west, full of human pulses, slow and sleeping. None of these were what he had come for. Beyond and beneath, half hidden by the natural music of the wood, a different presence rang, many of them, in fact, all of them strange. They did not breathe, they did not have heartbeats. The places they stood were filled with the steady, mineral cold of stone that had been carved into something graceful and then, just as carefully, made to walk. He had felt that cold before. Once in Bucharest in 1903, when he had foolishly taken a room above a wine cellar that turned out to be one of theirs. Once in the south of France, in the years when he had kept company with a younger woman than himself and not told her what he was, and one of them had passed beneath their balcony, and he had drawn a circle of salt around the bed before he could quite explain to himself why. Vampires. Half a dozen, perhaps 8, close, and not in the city. The pull at his sternum did not pull him toward them exactly, it pulled him through them, past them, to a place beyond. He frowned at that and walked on. The road dipped, and a turning he might have missed in any other state of attention opened among the trees. It was not paved. It was barely a road. He walked it anyway, slow, and let his presence soften so that the forest, which had begun to mark him, would forget that it had. He had grown gentle at this work. He had, after all, had a long time to practice. He did not see the woman until she stepped out from behind a cedar. She was very pale and very still, with hair the color of polished mahogany and eyes the warm gold of buttered amber. The child she held against her hip was perhaps the size of a 4-year-old. The child's hair was a darker, redder brown, and her eyes were the deep brown of a human girl's eyes, which made the rest of her, the porcelain skin, the unnatural symmetry. The way she did not seem to weigh anything at all in her mother's grip. Strike Harry with the small, shocked silence one feels at a contradiction one had not been told to expect. He stopped walking. The woman regarded him without surprise, which surprised him. Vampires were good at masking their reactions, but they were not always good at avoiding them entirely. This one's stillness was a discipline. He could feel the practice of it. The child, and Harry was already certain she was a child, though everything in him insisted that no vampire could be, looked at him with the bright, unguarded interest of someone who had not yet learned to hide behind her face. "You're trespassing," the woman said, not unkindly. "I beg your pardon," he said, in the softer voice he reserved for animals and frightened people. "I felt something here that I haven't felt in a long time. I came to see what it was." "Felt something," she repeated. "Yes," she studied him. He held very still and let her. He had warded himself against too easy a reading, but he did not bother to hide his face. Faces, in his experience, did less to give him away than people imagined. "What kind of something?" she said at last. He glanced at the child. The child, who had until that moment been content to study him, lifted her small hand and reached toward him with an unmistakable purpose, and the woman caught the hand at the wrist as gently as a bird-keeper catches a hawk. "Not yet, Renesmee," the woman murmured. "She wants to show me something." Harry said he did not know how he knew. He knew. There were gifts in the world he had not seen before, and the child was one of them. "Yes," the woman said, surprised again. "How did you? What's happening?" The new voice was a man's, low and tense, and Harry turned without lifting his wand. He had felt the man approach a heartbeat before he spoke. The cold around him was layered and old, and he moved faster than the woman had, faster than anything strictly natural, and he had positioned himself between the woman and Harry without seeming to cross the distance. He was tall and lean and bronze-haired, his face a study in restraint, and he was not afraid, but he was alert in a way that any practiced duelist would recognize at once. Harry saw the moment the man tried to do something with his eyes, read him, perhaps, or feel him, in the way a Legilimen's did. Although Harry would have wagered against precisely that talent in a vampire, and Harry felt the touch land against the wards he had built around his own mind and slide off, unsuccessful, the way a hand might slide off polished glass, the man's brow tightened. He had felt the slide. He did not like it. "Hello," Harry said calmly. "I'm not here to hurt anyone. You can't read him," the woman said, watching her husband's face. "No," he said, "I can't." "Has that happened before?" "Once," the man said, his mouth curved into a small, complicated expression. "But you weren't trying to keep me out then?" The woman's eyes flicked briefly to Harry's hand, to the wand, which he had not raised, and back to his face. He had let himself be seen with it on purpose. There was a particular kind of trouble that came from people imagining your hands were empty. "My name is Harry Potter," he said. "I'm a wizard. I came to Forks because I felt something here. I don't know what I expected to find. I think I've found it." For a long moment nobody spoke. Wind moved through the cedars. The owl in the hemlock spread its wings, considered them, and folded them again. The child, Renesmee, leaned her head against her mother's shoulder and watched Harry with the steady, courteous attention of a far older person trapped in a small body. "A wizard," the man said at last, slowly. "Yes." "You'll forgive me if I find that surprising." "I'd forgive you for finding it ridiculous," Harry said. "Most people do, most people, I should say, used to. There are others. Of me." Harry tilted his head. "Yes, not as many as there used to be, but yes, we hide. The same way you do, mostly, although I suspect we have a better track record." The woman made a small, surprised sound at that. It was almost a laugh. "Bella," the man said, and it was an introduction and a careful warning at once. He did not take his eyes off Harry. This is my wife, Bella. Our daughter, I'm Edward Cullen. A pleasure, Harry said. Is it? It might be. Edward's mouth moved again. There was something in his face that Harry could read at 20 paces. The involuntary, helpless pull of a man trying to read a mind that had never let itself be read, and who had only met one other such mind in his lifetime, and who was now confronting a second and not at all liking the implication. Harry felt sympathy for him and did not show it, because he had learned that pity given too easily turned into an insult. What do you want? Edward said. To talk in the first instance, Harry said. And then, if my reading of the situation is correct, which I think it is, although I would be glad to be wrong, to help. Help with what? Harry let his wand slide back into his sleeve. The motion was deliberate, slow, and Edward, who had been watching for it, did not move and yet looked very slightly less prepared to kill him. With the people who are coming for your daughter, Harry said. Bella did not gasp. She did not move at all. The stillness that was a discipline became, for an instant, a stillness that was a wound. The child in her arms, Renesmee, turned her face into her mother's shoulder for a moment, and then turned it back and looked at Harry, and her small hand reached out again. This time Bella did not catch the wrist. Renesmee, Edward said quietly. It's all right, Bella whispered. The child's fingers brushed Harry's cheek. He had been touched by curses. He had been touched by death twice, and had walked away from her each time with a politeness that had eventually become a friendship of a kind. He had been touched by lovers, by enemies, by old men holding his face in trembling hands and weeping at the way he refused to age. He had not been prepared for this. The child's gift unfurled into him like a sheaf of photographs poured into water. He saw the inside of a room, firelight on a polished floor, a young woman whose belly was vast and impossible, a tall man holding her up, pain, a terrible cold, a wolf as tall as a horse, a man with eyes the color of bruised wine in a long gray cloak, looking down at a body in a snow-flecked clearing, the way the snow had felt under bare feet, the careful, sweet warmth of being held against a cold chest. He saw Bella's face, beautiful and frightened, and Edward's face, beautiful and exhausted, and a tall, handsome young man with dark, sun-warmed skin who carried Renesmee on his shoulders without apparent effort. He saw last what was less an image than an idea, a feeling of a great cold approaching from a great distance, and the knowledge, held in this small body somehow, without the words to hold it in, that her family would die. Harry inhaled slowly. Renesmee took her hand back and tucked it against her mother's neck. Her brown eyes had not left his face. How did you? He began and then did not finish. Asking was an insult to a gift. He had learned that too. She shows people things, Bella said. Her voice was not steady. She doesn't speak much. She doesn't have to. Yes, he said. You felt all of that. All of it. Edward, who had clearly been watching Harry's face with a hunger that he was not even trying to hide now, said almost to himself he understood her perfectly. Yes. Harry said again and looked at Edward and added gently, some of us are good with children. That, of all things, made Edward smile. It was a brief, rueful smile, gone almost as soon as it came. You said you'd help, Bella said, if you'll have me. Why? He had been asked that question more times than he had been asked any other, and he had given many answers, depending on the asker. He looked at Renesmee, at the impossible, careful, watchful child, and gave the answer that was true. I have lived a long time, he said. Longer than I expected. Long enough to have seen people in cloaks come to small houses in small towns to take away things they decided ought not to exist. I am very tired of it. I am too tired of it to walk past it anymore. Bella's eyes filled. She did not let the tears fall. He suspected she could not in any case, but the impulse was there, pure and unmistakable, and he found himself liking her for it. You felt them, she said. The Volturi, from far away, you felt them coming. I felt something from this place, he said. I followed it. I did not know what they were called when I started walking. I do now. You know them. I know of them. I have made it my business in the last century to know who is who in our shared night. I have not crossed paths with the people in cloaks before. I have seen what they leave behind. What we tell you, Edward said slowly, won't change your offer? Nothing you tell me will change it, Harry said, although I would prefer to hear it before I begin. Edward looked at his wife. There was a long, silent communication between them. Harry, who had given up the bad habit of trying to listen in on lovers, looked instead at the child, who was studying him with the same patient, courteous interest with which she had studied him from the beginning. "Hello, Renesmee," he said very gently. She put her hand to his cheek again, not this time to show him anything, but only to acknowledge that he had spoken to her. Her palm was warm. She had a heartbeat. He had not noticed before in the noise of the moment. Now, hearing it, he felt the strange, unexpected ache of something in his chest that did not yet have a name. "I think we'd like you to come home with us," Bella said. "I think I would like to come." "Not all of my family will be glad to see you," Edward warned. "I have been disliked by experts," Harry said mildly. "Lead on." They went back through the trees the way Harry had come, and then off to the side, along a deer trail Harry had not consciously noticed, and as he followed he let the wards he had drawn around his mind soften by a fraction. Just a fraction. Edward, walking just ahead of him, glanced back once, and Harry saw the man's eyes flick at the air around Harry's head as if he were looking at something visible. "Easier?" Harry asked. "Easier," Edward said. "Thank you, you are welcome. You are doing it on purpose." "Yes." "And not letting me see anything you don't want me to?" "Also yes." Edward almost smiled. He didn't quite. They walked on. "I'll need to tell you something before we get there," he said after a moment. "We have a friend who can see the future sometimes. She has been having trouble seeing for the last few weeks. She thinks part of the trouble is the wolves, who she can never see. Some of it is the child. There's another piece she can't account for. She has been blaming herself for it." "It is me," Harry said. "I thought so. Magic interferes." "It is not personal, I'll explain. And the others will distrust me on principle, and I will not blame them for it. I have time." "How much time exactly do you have?" "More than is fair," Harry said. "More than I deserve, less than I need, the usual quantity, I suspect." That earned him another almost smile. The forest opened a little, the trail widened. Through the trunks Harry caught his first glimpse of the great glass house among the cedars, and it sat in its clearing like something that had grown there of its own accord, and the air around it sang, very faintly, with the coldness of 7 beings who did not breathe and yet were already turning toward the sound of his footsteps. Renesmee turned her small head against her mother's shoulder and, very plainly, smiled at him. He smiled back and walked on. Chapter 1. And the house was the kind of house Harry had only ever seen in glossy magazines, and once, years before, in the Pyrenees, when an old French wine merchant with too much money had built himself a glass cathedral on a hilltop and then died in it of loneliness. This one had not died. It was alive in the small, careful way of houses that were loved. Wood and stone and great clean panes, a porch built around the trunk of a hemlock, a garden gone slightly wild around the edges because the people inside did not eat what they grew. It looked, from the outside, like the home of a wealthy professor. The 7 cold presences inside had arranged themselves before Harry came around the last bend. He could feel them, taking positions that were almost, but not quite, casual. A tall figure by the door, 2 on a staircase, 2 flanking the kitchen, 1 in front of a high window, and this one moved as Harry watched, drifting closer to the front entrance with the loose, intent grace of a hunting dog. Edward, in front of him, paused at the porch steps and laid one hand against the door without opening it. "Carlyle," he said, not loudly, "we have a guest." The door opened of its own accord. Harry took the steps 2 at a time and stopped at the threshold. He had been received by old families before. He had walked into the parlors of pure-blood houses in his youth and felt the 7 generations of black portraits judge his shoes. He had climbed the long staircase of the Romanian lord, whose wand he now carried, and been measured by hard old eyes that had outlived 3 empires. None of those rooms had felt quite like this one. There was no portraiture. There were no heirlooms. There was only a single, breath-holding family of beautiful people, all of whom looked at him as if he had walked into their living room with a torch. The man at the head of them came forward without hesitation. He was tall and lean and fair-haired, his face the kind of face artists drew when they were trying to give the saints a little dignity, and he extended his hand. "Carlyle Cullen," he said. "Welcome to my home. Harry Potter, The hand was cool and dry and the grip courteous. The eyes, gold like all the others, were steady. Harry liked him immediately, which was either an excellent or a terrible omen. "Please come in." "Bella, sweetheart, are you all right?" "I'm fine," Bella said. She stepped past Harry into the house and set Renesmee down. The child stood neatly on her own feet, her hand still in her mother's, and looked up at the small, golden-haired woman who came at once to meet them. "Mama," she said, and the woman bent to gather her up, and Harry felt the involuntary unclenching of every member of the family at the sound. The child had spoken his name in a sense and had been answered. The woman straightened with Renesmee on her hip, a striking young woman with hair like spun copper and an expression of deeply suspicious courtesy that he gave her credit for not bothering to hide. "This is my sister, Rosalie," Edward said behind Harry, "and her husband Emmett, my brother Jasper and his wife Alice, my mother Esme, Carlisle, you've met." The introductions were polite shorthand for "we are watching you and we are deciding," which was as it should have been. Harry inclined his head to each in turn. The dark-haired pixie of a woman, Alice, held his gaze for a beat longer than the others. He had felt the moment she tried to look ahead at him and the moment her vision had snagged. She did not look distressed. She looked, instead, like a chess player trying to place an unfamiliar piece on a board. "You blur," she said at last, plainly. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. Bella does the same thing, only different." The man Edward had named Jasper had not moved from his post by the staircase. He was lean and quiet, with a faint silver tracery of old scars at his throat and along his jaw, and his eyes were the careful eyes of a man who had been a soldier longer than he had been anything else. His attention slid over Harry and the air around Harry both, and Harry felt the brush of a foreign sensitivity against his own, not legilimency exactly, but its cousin. A feeling out, a taking stock of his emotional weather. He let it happen and offered the man what he was actually feeling, which was a calm wariness and a small, steady current of resolve. Jasper's eyes narrowed by a millimeter, and Harry decided that the millimeter was approval. "Sit down, please," Carlisle said and indicated a long, pale couch by the window. "Will you take anything?" "I'm well," Harry said. "We don't keep anything you'd want. I should have offered you something on the way. You'd have had a hard time finding it within 50 miles of here. Don't trouble yourself." He sat. He sat because sitting was a small kindness to people who were considering whether they ought to kill you. Standing made them keep weight on the balls of their feet. Sitting let them take a breath. The Cullens did not, of course, breathe. They appreciated the gesture anyway. Esme, the gentle-faced woman who had been at the kitchen end of the room, settled down at the corner of the couch beside him with the wholly unhurried air of someone who could not be hurt and had nothing to fear, which was a kindness she did not have to extend and which he marked. "Tell us," Carlisle said and pulled up a chair across from him. "Edward says you knew about the Volturi before you came here." "I knew that something was coming," Harry said. "I felt it as I crossed into Washington. I felt your daughter when I came near. I would not have known the name if Bella had not used it to me, although I had guessed by then what kind of trouble had brought me here. I have known of the Volturi as a body and of Arrow, Caius, and Marcus as individuals for about 120 years. He let that sit. Esme's small intake of breath was the only sound in the room. Rosalie, by the kitchen, set her hand against the counter and very softly tightened her grip until the granite gave a faint, dry crack. Carlisle did not look at his wife or his daughter. He looked at Harry and his face had gone politely pale, which on a vampire was an interesting effect. "You are older than you look," he said. "Yes. How much older?" "Old enough that the question stops being polite," Harry said, "but I'll answer it. I was born in 1980. I expected for some time to die in 1998. I did not, and I have been a problem to myself ever since." A long silence. "That is 150 years, Bella said. "It is. Wizards live that long. Some of them do," Harry said. "Most of them do not." I'm not sure of the right tense, somewhat unusual. Carlisle's eyes had not left his face. The doctor in him was moving carefully through the implications. The historian in him was already cataloging the questions he was going to ask later when there was time. Harry had met that look on a great many faces over the years and respected it on this one. "Are you a danger to my family?" Carlyle said. "No more than you would be to me if I behaved badly. I came in good faith. I sit here unarmed." "You have a wand in your sleeve," Edward said. "I have a wand in my sleeve," Harry agreed. "I am a wizard. I have a few other things in a few other places. I am not unarmed in the way you mean. I would prefer not to insult you by pretending I am. I am not, however, a danger to your family." "Why?" Rosalie said. It was the first word she had spoken. Her voice was lower than he had expected and harder. "What do you get out of it?" He considered her carefully. There were old griefs in her face that he recognized, not by their content, which he could not see, but by their shape. He gave her the short version. "I have lived a long time," he said. "I have been alone for most of it. I have buried people I was supposed to bury and people I was not. I have stood on the side of fields and watched cloaked people destroy children they decided ought not to exist, and I have walked away from those fields more than once, because the war was already over by the time I got there. I am tired of walking away. Your daughter is the first new thing I have seen in 20 years. The people who are coming to this house intend to kill her because she frightens them, and they intend to kill the rest of you because they cannot afford for you to remember what they did. I am here to make that more difficult than they expect. That is what I get out of it." "Sentiment," Rosalie said. "Sentiment," he agreed. "I have outlived most of my other reasons." She did not soften exactly. She did, however, very faintly nod once and step back from the counter and look away from him out the window, which was the closest a Rosalie was going to come to consenting to his presence, and Harry took it. "Mr. Potter," Carlyle said. Harry. "May I ask you to explain? Please understand I am asking only because I do not want to assume what kind of help you imagine offering us?" He had been ready for the question. He answered it the way he had decided on the road that he would answer it. "I can do 4 things you cannot," he said. "I can hide a great many people from being seen and from being heard and from being followed in ways that the gifts you have described to me cannot easily undo. I can shield minds, if I am close enough, against the touch of a stronger legilimens than I am, and I think your friend in Volturi is one. I can make a very particular kind of fire that is unkind to the kind of stone you and I are made of in different proportions, although it is not always possible to be clean about it, and I can fight. I have been fighting for a long time. I would prefer not to have to. I will if you and I judge that fighting is what is needed. You speak of Arrow," Edward said. "I do. You called him a legilimens. It is what we would call him. He must touch you to read you, you said." "Yes." "Then he is what we would call a touch legilimens. They are not common. They are very strong when they are good, and yours is good. He cannot, I think, read me, and he could not read me even if I let him try, because some part of what is wrong with my mind, and I will tell you about that later if you want, is that it has stopped being a thing he can read. But I can teach Bella to extend what she does, and I can shield others." "You know about Bella," Edward said. He glanced at his wife. "I felt it when she met me," Harry said. "Among my people, what she does has a name. We call it occlumency. It does not, in our books, work passively. It does in her case. I would like, if she will let me, to look at it more closely. There may be things she can do with it that I can teach her. There may be things I can do with it that I cannot do with my own." "You will not hurt her doing it," Edward said. It was not quite a question. "I will not." "How do I know that?" Harry let himself smile faintly. "Because if I were going to, I would have lied to you in the woods, which would have been a poor choice given that you cannot read me. I am not in the business of betraying people who have not yet betrayed me. It is bad practice and worse manners." Bella laughed suddenly, a surprised and almost startled sound. "I like him," she said. "You'll forgive me if I'm not yet there," Edward said dryly. "I'm getting there." "You are very welcome to take your time," Harry said. A thump shook the porch. The door, which had closed itself politely behind Harry, was thrown open without ceremony, and a young man in nothing but cut-off jeans came through it on bare brown feet, the wet of the rain still on his shoulders, and stopped in the doorway and stared. He was a head and a half taller than Harry. He was the largest indoor person Harry had seen in the last several years, and Harry had once shared a hostel with a Norwegian giant. The young man's eyes, black, sharp, intelligent, went straight from Harry's face to the wand in Harry's sleeve, which was not quite visible but which the young man somehow registered all the same, and then to Renesmee, who was sitting in Esme's lap watching the proceedings with patient interest. And then back to Harry. "Who is this?" he said flatly. "Jacob," Bella said. "Stand down, Bells. Stand down, I mean it." "Who is he?" "His name is Harry Potter. He is a wizard. He came to help. He hasn't tried to lie to anyone yet, and I think it would have been better if you'd knocked." "I don't knock at this house anymore. You are knocking from now on." There was a beat of silent, scolded silence, and then the young man, Jacob, Harry took it, closed his mouth and looked at Renesmee, and in his face there was the involuntary, helpless tenderness Harry had seen in the faces of hardened soldiers when their children were brought to them after a battle. The recognition surprised him. It was a kind of love he had read about more often than he had felt, and which, when he had felt it, had cost him a great deal. "He's a wizard." Jacob said, "Yes, like in books." "Like in books," Harry said. Although the books are a bit out of date, Jacob considered him. Then, with the same quickness Edward had used, he crossed the room, not to Harry but to Renesmee, and crouched in front of Esme's chair and put his hand against the child's hand and looked into the child's face. Whatever passed between them was, like all the Cullens' communications, silent and complete. Jacob nodded once, stood up, turned around, and looked at Harry as if seeing him for the first time. "All right," he said. "Hi, hello. I'm Jacob Black. I'm something." "We can talk about that later." "You are a shapeshifter," Harry said. "I felt the others when I came in. There are 6 of you near and a dozen more within 10 miles. I have known werewolves. You aren't werewolves. Forgive me, the difference matters, at least to me." Jacob's eyebrows climbed. "You know what we are. I know what you aren't. I am willing to be told what you are when you and your people would like to tell me." "Huh," Jacob said. He looked at Bella. "You vouching for him?" "I'm vouching for him," Bella said. "That'll do." He folded himself down onto the rug beside Renesmee's chair and lifted her bodily off Esme's lap and into his own without asking, which the child plainly expected. Esme smiled. Edward did not quite, but he relaxed by a fraction, which Harry had begun to understand was, on Edward's face, the rough equivalent of a hug. "All right," Carlyle said gently and looked back at Harry. "I think we have many things to discuss, many things. Will you stay here with us while we have them? If you'll have me, we will have you." "Thank you," Harry said. "I'd like to start with what you know about Volturi, then I'd like to see your friend who can see the future try to look at me. Then I think I'd like to talk to you alone, Carlyle, about what you and I have in common, which is more than I am yet ready to say in front of everybody else. Then I would like, if she's willing, to spend a little time with Bella on the matter of her shield." "And the wolves?" Jacob said. "The wolves," Harry said, "I'd like to talk to, if they'd care to talk to me." "They'll care," Jacob said. "Then I'll come to them if it would put your people more at ease rather than asking you to come to me." "That would put my people at ease. Then it's done." Outside, the rain that had hung undecided in the air all afternoon decided at last to fall. It began very softly against the great glass walls. Renesmee, on Jacob's lap, lifted her hand and put it against Harry's cheek across the small distance between them, and showed him a single image. A clearing in the snow, bright with cold sun, and the Cullens standing in a line, and behind them a dozen others Harry did not yet know. And beside them Harry himself, standing easily, his wand at his side. The image was not a prediction. It was a hope. He felt the difference in his chest as plainly as he would have felt the difference between a question and a kiss. "That's a good picture," he said quietly. The child smiled. He put his hand around hers. She was warm. She was, against everything he had been taught his whole long life, alive. He had come a long way to find that out. Carlyle's study was on the upper floor at the back of the house, where the trees pressed in close enough to put a green light on the books. Harry had been in many libraries. He knew the difference between the libraries of men who collected books and the libraries of men who read them, and Carlyle's was clearly the latter. The shelves climbed all the way to the ceiling. There were ladders that slid on rails. There were medical journals from the 1830s in stacks beside a paperback of Marcus Aurelius and a battered copy of Ovid in the original. And the desk at the center of the room was a worn old thing of polished oak that had clearly come a long way to settle here. "I asked Esme to leave us." Carlyle said quietly as he closed the door behind them. I hope you do not mind. I expected it. You said downstairs that you wanted to talk to me about something you and I have in common. I would like to know, before we begin, what you meant. Harry walked to the window and looked out at the trees. In the long dusk of the afternoon, the cedars had begun to blur into a single living wall. He had not been alone in a room with another man for 10 months. Even this, with Carlyle, was a small kind of relief. There was something in the doctor's stillness that did not require him to perform. 2 things, he said. The first is that you and I have both lived a long time on a planet that does not enjoy us doing so. I did not say it to your family because they would not understand it the way you will. I think they would understand more than you imagine, Carlyle said, but I take your point. And the second, Harry turned. The second is that you and I are both, technically speaking, not supposed to exist. Carlyle's mouth tucked at one corner. He had a lovely smile, the kind that came easily to people who had decided a long time ago that the world was worth being kind to. He gestured to the chairs by the desk, and Harry sat in one and Carlyle sat in the other. Tell me, Carlyle said. Harry told him. He did not tell him everything. He had not told anyone everything in many years, and he was not going to start in a stranger's library on a Tuesday afternoon. But he told him enough. He told him that there had been a war when he was very young, that he had been at the center of it, that the war had ended on a school lawn at dawn with Harry walking out of the woods into the wand of the man who had been trying to kill him since he was a year old. He told him about the night before, in which he had walked into the same woods with 3 small objects in his pocket and been killed, and had not stayed killed. He told him, in the careful, oblique way he had grown used to speaking of it, what those 3 objects were, and what people had once called the man who possessed all 3. Carlyle did not interrupt. He listened the way he listened to everything, which was the way of a man whose stillness was practical. He was a doctor, and he had learned to keep his face calm so that the people across from him would tell him their whole symptoms. You are saying, Carlyle said when Harry had paused, that you are immortal? I am saying that I do not seem able to die. I have tested it more than once in the bad years. It is a different thing from yours. I age very slowly. I will go gray before I go anywhere else. I think I cannot prove this, that whatever it is in me does not stop my body from doing what bodies do. It only has the last word about whether I get to leave it. I have not been able to leave it. I have on 3 occasions asked very politely. The answer has been no. You consider it a curse. Carlyle said gently, you hesitated about the word, but it is what you mean. Most days, Harry said, and other days. Other days I am grateful that I was here when your daughter-in-law was born and that I am here now to help. Carlyle nodded slowly. I will not pretend to know the shape of what you have lived. I will say only that I understand a piece of it. I was 23 when I was changed. I had been hunting the men who took the people of my city in the night, and one of them turned out to be more than a man. I wanted for the first months to die. The rest of my life has been, in part, the work of finding out what I want to do instead. You have done it well. I have tried. You have, Harry said. He let himself look at Carlyle briefly and felt for the first time in many weeks the small, embarrassing thing of being seen. He looked away again. I had a question I wanted to ask you about vampires and wizards. Will you let me? Of course. You have been alive for 350 years. Have you in that time ever met one of us? Carlyle did not answer at once. Harry waited. Once, the doctor said, in the spring of 1748, I was traveling through the south of England. I had been in London for some time, studying anatomy at one of the hospitals, and I had grown weary of cities. I went on foot through Hampshire, and one evening I came upon a small inn in a village that I will not name because I no longer remember it. I took a room. The innkeeper warned me that a strange man had also taken a room that night, and that the strange man had asked for a private dining room and had been given one, and that I was to mind my own business. You did not. I did not. I had been very lonely. I went down at the dinner hour and asked the strange man if I might join him. He looked at me for a long time. He had eyes that did not quite settle. He had a thing on the table beside his plate, slim and pale, about the length of his forearm. I now know what it was. He saw what I was at once. I do not know how. He told me in the kindest voice I had heard in years that he could not eat with me but that he would gladly drink and that he did not mind a little company. We spoke for 3 hours. He was older than I was. He did not look it. He said his name was Alexander, although I doubt very much that it was. He told me when he left that there were people of his kind who knew of people of mine and had decided, a long time ago, that the easiest thing to do about us was to pretend we did not exist. He told me to remember that if I ever needed to, and to remember also that there were old men in robes who had been very kind to him in his youth and who would, he believed, be kind to me as well if I ever asked. I took it as a courtesy. I did not, in the years since, find a way to ask. You wouldn't have, Harry said. We are good at not being found by the very polite. I see that now. Did he tell you anything else of significance? Yes, he told me that there was a statute. That there had been a war between the courts, very long ago, that ended in a treaty he could not describe, and that the treaty had cost both sides very much. He said his kind had agreed not to seek out my kind. He said my kind had agreed not to seek out his. He said the agreement had held mostly for centuries. It has held, Harry said, mostly? Until now. The Volturi do not know about us, Harry said. They are old, but they are not as old as the treaty. They have not been told or have not believed what they were told. There are people in our world who watch them. There has not been a wizard at Volterra in 80 years. The last one came back missing his hands. He is alive. He runs an apothecary in Marrakesh. I know him. He told me what little he saw. What did he see? That arrow is very intelligent, very vain, very afraid of being bored. That Caius is afraid of being weak. That Marcus has stopped wanting anything and is therefore the most dangerous of the three because no one knows what he will do if a thing finally interests him again. That the guard is a polished instrument and that 2 of its pieces, Jane and Alec, are the most accomplished mental practitioners my colleague had ever felt in his life. He said Alec's gift in particular reminded him of a curse our kind invented in the 17th century to put down riots. He said the wizard who invented it died of self-imposed exile because he could not bear what he had done with it. And you, Carlyle said after a moment, are you intelligent, vain, afraid? Harry smiled slightly. I am intelligent enough to know what I do not know. I am vain in the particular way of people who have been written about. I am afraid of growing dull. I am, beyond those, not enough of any of them to be arrow. I have considered the question. You are sure of yourself. I have had time. Carlyle inclined his head. He drummed his fingers once, very lightly, on the arm of his chair, in the way of a man who had old habits left over from when he had been able to fidget. Will you tell me, he said, why you came down out of the woods to speak to my daughter-in-law and then sat in my living room in front of my family and told them plainly that you would help us? You said something about a child you knew. You said your child reminded you of mine. Harry did not, at first, answer. The light through the trees had shifted. The room had gone darker. He looked at his hands. They were shaped like a young man's hands, long-fingered, not quite steady, with a small white scar on the back of the right one that had not faded in 130 years, and decided. His name was Teddy, he said. He was my godson. His parents were a witch and a man called a werewolf, although werewolves of our kind are not quite what they are in the old stories. They were both killed at the end of the war I told you about. I was 18. He was a few weeks old. I raised him with help. He was metamorph magus, which means he could change his face the way some of your friends can change shape. It was a gift his mother had. It was a thing the Ministry of Magic had argued for decades ought not to be allowed to walk free. There were old laws. There had been raids. His mother had been targeted as a child. He paused. He looked up. Carlyle's face was very still. He died, Harry said, of an ordinary illness when he was 86. I was there. He was fine. He was not afraid. We had had time. But the thing I remember most about him is that when he was very small, he would come and put his hand against my cheek, and he would change his face into mine, and we would laugh, and he was alive, and the people who had said he ought not to be had been wrong. And they had been wrong about every child of his kind, and they have been wrong about every child of any kind that anyone ever decided ought not to exist. Renesmee reminded me of him in the woods today. I felt her gift, and I thought of his. I am not here for Bella. I am not here for you. I am not here in any larger sense for the Cullens. I am here for the child who is going to die in a clearing in the snow if I am not standing in the snow with her." He stopped. He had not meant to say that much. He had not realized, in fact, that he had so much of it left to say. He looked at the window. He felt very tired. "Forgive me," he said. "There is nothing to forgive. I have not spoken his name aloud in some years." "It is a good name," Carlyle said. "Yes, it is." They sat in silence for a long while. Outside, the rain had begun to thicken. It was now genuine rain, no longer hesitating about whether to fall. The room had gone darker still. Carlyle very quietly leaned forward, set his cool hand briefly against Harry's hand on the arm of the chair, and withdrew it again. "Mr. Potter," he said. Harry, I will tell you something, and I will only tell you once, because I have found that this kind of thing is best said with as little fuss as possible. You are welcome here, not as an asset, not as a wizard. As a man who has come a long way and who has agreed to stand beside us in a thing that has terrified me for many days. Whatever else happens, whether or not we win, whether or not you wish to leave us afterward, whether or not you ever again come this way, you are welcome here, and my house is yours for as long as you should wish to be in it." Harry, who had not been spoken to in that voice in a very long time, did not, for a moment, trust himself to speak. "Thank you," he said finally, and he meant it. "Now," Carlyle said, rising from his chair as if nothing remarkable had been said, "shall we go down? I suspect Alice is preparing a small interrogation. Renesmee has asked me twice in the last hour whether she might cook something for you which she cannot, and which she has therefore decided to do anyway. I do not have the heart to stop her. Bella, I think, has questions. Edward also has questions, but he is being polite about them." "Edward is not polite about anything," a voice said from the other side of the door. Carlyle smiled. "He is occasionally polite. I'm polite to my mother. You are. Come in, Edward. We were finishing." The door slid open. Edward did not quite come in. He stood in the door frame with his arms loosely crossed and looked at Harry. "You should know," he said, "that you can hear the rest of us thinking downstairs. I'd like to be excused from being thought too unkindly of." "I cannot hear thoughts," Harry said. "No." Edward said, "But you have the look of a man who is very used to being thought about loudly." Harry laughed. It was the first laugh he had laughed in some weeks, and it was small and surprised and genuine. Carlyle gave him a sidelong, pleased glance. "I will warn you," Edward said, "that Alice has decided you are her favorite new project. I would offer to protect you, except I haven't been successful at it on my own behalf in 80 years. I will fend for myself. That is what they all say." The three of them went downstairs together. Alice was waiting at the bottom of the staircase, her chin on her hand, with the bright-eyed look of a chess player who had finally found an opponent who would play with her. Bella was on the couch with Renesmee asleep against her shoulder. Renesmee had indeed cooked, and a faintly burned smell was apologizing from the kitchen because nobody had ever taught the oven what to do for a guest. Jasper was leaning by the window with his arms folded, watching the trees. Emmett was lounging on the rug with the wholly unconcerned air of a man who had decided that everyone else was overreacting. Rosalie had positioned herself near the kitchen and was studiously not looking at Harry. Jacob was outside on the porch, a long, dark shape against the falling rain, watching the woods with the alert interest of a sentry. The Cullens, all of them, turned as Harry came down the stairs, and in their faces, for the first time, he saw the small, settled adjustment of people who had decided that he was, for the moment, theirs. He set his bag down at the foot of the stairs. He sat in the chair Renesmee had pulled up for him by the fire. He let himself be, for the first time in a long time, expected. It felt strange. It also, very faintly, felt like coming home. Outside, the rain came down. Inside, somewhere, in a very old building in a very old town in Italy, someone in a long gray cloak had begun to wonder, very quietly, whether the wind had begun to shift. Chapter 3 and Chapter 4. Gathering of witnesses. The witnesses came in by twos and threes, the way long-lived people came to anything serious, not in a hurry, but with the unmistakable look of having already canceled the rest of the month. Tanya's family arrived first at twilight on the second day. They were 3 women and 1 man, all of them blonde or near blonde, all of them gold-eyed in the way of the Cullens and some of their friends. And they came into the great glass house with a gravity that did not so much announce them as set the room down a little firmer on its foundations. Tanya herself was tall and graceful and already weeping quietly when she gathered Renesmee into her arms, the kind of weeping that was less grief than frustrated love. And Harry, who had risen out of courtesy, stayed standing in the corner of the room and let them have their moment. Eleazar was the one who turned around first. He was a slight, dark-haired man in a long, plain coat, and he had been a member of the Volturi Guard for 2 centuries before he had walked out of Volterra one morning and never gone back, and he carried that fact in the way he held his shoulders. Harry had watched him come through the door and felt the tug of attention against his wards before Eleazar had even turned his head. His gift, Harry already knew from Carlisle, was the seeing of gifts. And Eleazar had clearly felt his own talent slap up against the wards Harry had laid around himself and slide off a polished cliff. "Carlisle," Eleazar said without taking his eyes off Harry. "Who is your guest, my friend?" Carlisle said easily. "Harry." "You'll forgive him, he is harder to read than is comfortable for any of us. Harry, this is Eleazar Denali. He has, among his gifts, a great curiosity about gifts. Eleazar, Harry is one of the few of his kind I have ever met. We can speak about it more later." Eleazar's eyes did not leave Harry. He came forward as if drawn by a magnet, slow, polite, and he extended his hand. Harry shook it. The man's fingers were cold and dry, his eyes were, when one was close, the deep gold of dark amber. "You are very much there," Eleazar said softly. "You are a great deal more there than most people are. I do not have the words for it." "That has always been my problem," Harry said in a sentence. Eleazar laughed, a sudden open laugh that he immediately stifled as if he had not expected it of himself. "I am sorry, I forget my manners. May I look a little at what you are? I will stop the moment you wish me to." "You may look," Harry said. "You will not see, I think, what you expect. I will help you stop if I see you struggling." He let, by careful degrees, a fraction of the wards around himself relax. He did not relax all of them. He had not relaxed all of them in 30 years and was not going to begin now. But he let one corner of his magic become visible, the way a magician might let one card peek out of a sleeve to satisfy a curious child. Eleazar's eyes widened. He took a half step back. He swayed. Carmen, his wife, was at his elbow before he had even started to fall, but he caught his own balance with a hand against the back of a chair and stood there, breathing as though he had been running, although he no longer needed to breathe. "Eleazar," Carmen said sharply. "I am all right, my heart," he said in a voice that was not quite all right. "What did you see?" "Layers," he said. He looked up at Harry, and his face had gone almost reverent in the way Harry had hated being looked at his entire long life and had never gotten used to. "Layers, like an onion. Like a great old library where every shelf is a different talent and every shelf is full. I have never. There is something at the center of it I could not even see, only feel, and it is I cannot. I am sorry, I am being ridiculous." "You are not being ridiculous," Harry said gently. "You are seeing something I have spent a long time learning to make smaller. Sit down." Eleazar sat. Carmen sat with him. The rest of the Denali had stopped talking and were watching Harry with the care of people who had decided, all at once, that this man was either the greatest stroke of luck of their long lives or the worst. Harry let them watch. He did not enjoy it. He did not show that he did not enjoy it. "Tell us," Tanya said at last. Plainly. So Carlisle told her. He told it as if it were a small story, although it was a story that had been growing larger every time he heard it, and he told it without embellishment. The Denali listened. The Denali asked, as he finished, 3 good questions. Harry answered them. By the time the next set of witnesses arrived, the Egyptian coven, somber and proud, led by a man called Ammon, whose son Benjamin was the young vampire whose gift made the room go briefly warmer when he laughed. The story had hardened into a shape, and the shape held. "You will not, of course, fight beside us," Ammon said to Harry when they had all been introduced. "You will only stand witness." "I will fight," Harry said mildly. "You will fight. If it comes to fighting, I will fight. If it does not, I will not. But I will not stand and watch what happens here as though I were not part of it." Ammon studied him. Ammon's gold eyes had been red once, and he carried the carefulness of a man who had once been a different shape and intended never to go back. After a moment he nodded, a small nod, and then, very briefly, a courtly half-bow. Harry returned it. Ammon, who had in his life been bowed to by everyone but the Volturi, accepted the courtesy as if it were the first one he had received in a long time. The Amazons came after midnight, the Irish the next morning, the wandering nomads Garrett with his American grin, and Mary and Randall and Charles and McKenna over the course of the next 2 days. They arrived in the middle of conversations, in the middle of meals nobody was eating, in the middle of a brief, small, sudden snow that fell on the third afternoon and stuck, and then melted by dusk. It was on that afternoon, with the smell of the snow still in the air, that the Romanians arrived. Harry had, of all the witnesses, looked forward to meeting them most. He had read about them, decades before, in a book in a Bulgarian wizard's study where he had once spent a winter trying not to drink. Stefan and Vladimir came up the porch on bare feet, a pair of slim, dark-haired vampires of identical height in identical pale coats, and stopped at the threshold and looked at Harry, and Harry knew, before they had spoken, that they were going to know him. "He is here," Stefan said. "He is." Vladimir agreed. "You said, brother, that they were stories." "I said, brother, that all of them have been stories for centuries. You owe me an apology." "I owe you no such thing. The story is here. The story can correct me itself." They came in step and stopped in front of Harry. They did not extend their hands. They inclined their heads in a precise and ancient way and held the inclination for what felt to Harry like a small and dignified eternity. "Wand-bearer," Stefan said. "That is one of our names for ourselves," Harry said. "I prefer Harry." "Harry, then." "Wand-bearer," Vladimir said coolly, ignoring his brother, "is also acceptable. Forgive my brother his courtesies. He has spent too long in the West. We have remembered you." "Your kind has," Harry said, "or your line has, our line." Stefan, this time he had very faintly smiled. "Our father, in his teaching of us, told us of 3 ranks of beings: those whose blood we drank, those whose blood we did not drink, and those whose blood we did not drink because we could not. The 3rd rank, he said, was small, but contained men who could undo us. He said they wore wood at their wrists and lived in places we could not find, and that they were keeping a peace with our courts that he hoped we would never break. He said that if we ever broke it, we would die before we knew what was killing us. He said he had once seen one of them in passing in Wallachia in the year of his change, and that the thing he remembered most clearly was that the man in the road had not been afraid of him. "That sounds about right," Harry said. "Are you afraid of us?" Vladimir asked. "I was once. I am not now. I have grown very tired of being afraid of people. I have learned that fear is a luxury I cannot afford to spend on someone I might shortly need to fight beside." "You will fight beside us?" Stefan said. "Yes." "Excellent." Vladimir said, with a smile that for a Romanian vampire was the equivalent of a delighted yelp. "We have been waiting 900 years to see Arrow inconvenienced. We will not get in your way." The Cullens, who had been listening from across the room, exchanged a look. Edward, in particular, looked at Harry with an expression that Harry had begun to recognize as the small, helpless laughter of a man who could not read him and yet was beginning, despite himself, to like him. "Harry," Carlyle said, "if you would not mind, I think we should begin." "Yes." "The training?" "Yes." He led them all out, after dinner, into the broad meadow behind the house, where the snow that had fallen on the morning had melted, but where the grass was still cold enough to whiten breath. They had pulled out the patio lamps and run them on heavy black extension cords from the garage. They cast a cold, even white light on the grass and made a stage of the meadow. 25 vampires, 6 wolves at the tree line in fur, watching with the unblinking patience of intelligent animals. 1 half-vampire child asleep on Esme's shoulder back at the house. 1 wizard. He did not, for a long moment, know what to say. He had spoken to crowds before. He had spoken to large groups in school halls and in clearings, and once, very memorably, in a Wiesen-Gamot chamber that had been redesigned to amplify whatever was said inside it. He had not, in any of those rooms, been the only one of his kind. He stood for a moment in the cold and felt the watching of so many old eyes on his face and made himself remember that this had, after all, been his choice. "I am not going to pretend," he said mildly, "that I know more about you than you do. I do not. What I know about is fighting. I know a number of things about fighting that have very little to do with how strong or how fast you are. I think what is coming requires those things. With your patience, I will teach what I can. The first thing I will teach is shielding. We have a shield," Tanya said, and her smile told Harry kindly that she had not yet decided to take him seriously. "You have Bella," Harry said. "Bella is very good. Bella is not alone a battlefield. Tonight I would like to teach the rest of you the simplest version of what Bella does, and I would like to teach Bella how to extend it." Tanya's smile faded by a fraction into curiosity. "How?" Eleazar said from the edge of the group. "May we shield who do not have the gift, most of you." Harry said, "Do not have the gift and will not get it and will not need it. What I am going to teach you is what we call occlumency. It is not a gift, it is a practice. It is to a vampire's mind what footwork is to a fighter's body. It will not make you immune to Arrow or to Jane or to Alec. It will make you a little harder to read, a little slower to fall, a little more able to think on your feet when one of them pulls something nasty. I am not going to make you wizards. I am going to make you people who can be hit by Jane and not lose their heads." "Show us," Vladimir said. Harry showed them. He showed them first that the way most of them held their minds, open, attentive, sharp, was the equivalent of holding their hands palm up, fingers spread. He showed them how to close their fingers. He showed them, with Eleazar's polite cooperation, how to make a thought you did not want read into a thing the reader could not see, by hiding it behind the sound of another thought. He showed them, by example with Edward, how it felt when a Legilimens slid off a shielded mind. Edward, gamely, agreed to be on the receiving end of the demonstration. He tried to read a vampire whom Harry had spent 30 seconds teaching and failed, and turned to Harry with a look of mingled astonishment and indignation. "You did that in 30 seconds, he said. "I taught it in 30 seconds. He learned it in 30 seconds. The reason most wizards take years is that they have minds so full of opinions about themselves that there is no room for the practice." "Vampires," Harry said mildly, looking at the 24 polished faces watching him with the unwavering attention of cats, "do not have this problem. You are very disciplined. You are also mostly in your bodies. Your minds are, by my standards, almost empty rooms." "It is much easier to shut a door on an empty room." Garrett laughed out loud at that. Several of the others smiled. Even Vladimir's mouth twitched. "I will be alone," Edward muttered, "the only one of you who fails this lesson." "You will be fine," Harry said. "We have already worked on yours this morning. You did not tell me that we were working on it." "I did not need to." Edward stared at him. Then very slowly he smiled, a small, helpless, real smile, and inclined his head, and went back to working on the small private practice Harry had given him, which was in the way of all such practices, both irritating and effective. Harry then turned to Bella. "You," he said. "Me." "Your shield, show me." She showed him. He had felt it on her since the woods. He had not yet looked at it carefully. Now, with her permission, he set the wards he had built around himself aside, and he reached out and laid the most delicate of his magics against the surface of her gift, and felt the shape of it like a glass dome above her, rounded and clean and almost frighteningly strong. The way the shell of an egg is strong if no one tries to pry it open from the right angle. "It is beautiful," he said. Honestly, she looked startled. "It's just there, I don't do anything to it." "That is part of the problem." "What's the other part?" "That you can stretch it and you have not yet learned how. We are going to teach you tonight." He set Edward and Eleazar at her, gently in turns. He coached her not on what to do. He had decided, in his minutes of considering her, that telling her what to do was the surest way to break what already worked, but on what to feel. Stretch it. Feel it as something with edges. Now those edges. Now further. Now that one too. Now hold. Now all of you around her take her in as well. Hold, hold, now further. Edward, push, now harder. Now Eleazar also she held. She held a great deal further than even Harry had expected, in fact, and when she dropped, finally exhausted, the dome had been wide enough to cover a third of the meadow. 20 witnesses included, and she had been holding it. Harry had timed it mentally for a little under 9 minutes. "You are," Harry said quietly, "going to be a great deal of trouble for the people in cloaks." She smiled, breathless in the way of someone who could not breathe but who had, in her muscle memory, kept the habit. "Tell me again," she said, "you are going to be a great deal of trouble." He worked through the rest of them after that. He worked the Egyptians on their gifts. Benjamin laughed in the cold at a small piece of magic Harry showed him about how to root a flame against a wind. And they spoke, the two of them, for a long while, about the difference between gift fire and witch fire and the things they could do together. He worked the Amazons on shielding. He worked the Irish on a trick about spotting an attempt to bind their loyalties before it took hold. He worked the wolves, who had come out of the trees in human form for the lesson, on what they could expect from Alex Mist and how to punch through it. He worked Garrett, who liked him, on how to talk down an opponent who had been told he ought to fight you. He worked the Romanians, who already liked him, on the small particular thing of how to disable a vampire without letting that vampire die. By the time the night was old, the meadow was a place of measured, quiet motion and small conferring voices. And Harry, who had been talking and working and watching for hours, looked up and saw that Carlyle had been standing at the porch the whole time, hands in his coat pockets. Watching him with the small, satisfied half-smile of a man who had long ago given up on being saved by miracles, and had now, against his own better judgment, decided to make an exception. Out in the trees on the far side of the meadow, in a clump of fir that nobody but Harry was ready to feel, a single still presence had been watching for an hour. It was not an unfriendly presence. It was not exactly a friendly one. It was patient and clinical, and it had a flavor that Harry recognized. Very old, very measured, very far from home, Demetri, Harry thought calmly. About time. He let the watcher watch a little longer. Then, with a small flick of his fingers, he shifted the shape of his presence, slid it behind the wards, the way a man sliding in front of a curtain might appear briefly to vanish, and felt the watcher in the firs flinch. The watcher did not approach. After another moment, the watcher slipped away. Harry felt him go all the way to the edge of his awareness and watched, in his mind's eye, as the man, for it was a man, moved through the deep night and the forest road and out onto the highway and into a rented car and away. He was already, mentally, beginning to compose his report. Harry let him. He had wanted in the end to be reported. He had wanted Arrow to know that there was something here that did not behave the way Arrow expected. He had wanted Arrow to come heavy and to come distracted and to come, above all, curious. He looked down at his hands. They had not, even once, been unsteady all evening. He flexed the fingers of his right hand thoughtfully, and thought about the small bone-fine curse he had not yet had occasion to teach, and about how, 800 miles south of Italy, in a small apothecary in Marrakesh, an old colleague of his might at this hour be feeling the small, distant tug of a thought sent his way by a friend. "All right," he said to the meadow, once more. "Then bed. Tomorrow we work on what to do when Jane decides to make the floor scream at you." The witnesses, almost as one, nodded and reset, and the strange, careful, beautiful work of the night began again. Harry woke, the next morning, in a guest room he had not expected to be given. It was at the back of the house, off the second-floor landing, with a window that looked into the cedars and a bed that had been freshly made by someone, Renesmee, almost certainly, who did not herself sleep, and had therefore made it more carefully than any inn ever had. He had not slept in it for the first half of the night. He had sat up reading in the chair by the window until his back began to complain and his eyes began to lose their focus, and only then had he allowed himself to lie down. He had slept 3 hours. He had, at his age, almost forgotten what it was like to sleep more. It was 5:15 in the morning when he came down the stairs, and the house was already in motion, in the soft, careful way of a house full of people who could move without waking the one person who had to be woken to be useful. "I made coffee," Renesmee said from the kitchen in a small, pleased whisper. "I have not done it for 100 years. I read about how to do it on the internet. I think I have done it correctly. I will be very embarrassed if I have not." "You have done it correctly," Harry said. He took the mug she handed him and breathed the steam and felt, for the first time in some weeks, the small, ordinary pleasure of having been thought of. He held the mug in both hands and looked at her across the rim. "You are kind," he said. "You are a guest in my house," she said. "Of course I am. I have not always been a guest in houses where my hosts thought of me before I came down." Then they were not the kind of houses you should have been in. Harry, on the kitchen stool with the mug warming his palms, decided he liked Renesmee Cullen very much and was going to spend whatever favor he could scrape together in the next few days making sure that nothing happened to her. The day's training, when it began, was different from the night before. The night before had been broad strokes. Now Harry worked in detail. He pulled the witnesses by twos and threes into the meadow as the cold light spread, and he showed each pair the specific mistakes he had seen them make, and he corrected the mistakes individually. He had been, in the long ago, a defense teacher for 1 year, in a school he no longer let himself think about. The work came back to his hands the way swimming came back to a body that had not swum in years. He also worked, and he worked first on Bella. "I want to try something," he said to her at dawn. "All right. I have in my pocket a small object. I am going to take it out. I want you to put your shield around me and around it, but not around either of us together. You will need to learn to make holes in your shield, to leave specific things outside it. We will need this in the field. If arrow touches your shield with someone you are protecting, the way he reads through a touch is going to test you. Show me." He took the small object from his pocket. It was a flat, dark stone about the size of a robin's egg with a thin line scratched on one face inside a circle inside a triangle. It was older than the house. It was older than Forks. It was older than the United States. He had carried it for 139 years in a pocket sewn shut and reopened, and he had not looked at it with his own eyes in any sustained way for a long time. Bella looked at it. She looked at his face. She did not ask, although the question was clearly there. "It is the second of 3, Harry said. "I will not, this morning, explain the others. They are not relevant. This one is. Keep it in mind. Make a hole in your shield exactly the size of it." Now, she tried. She did not at first succeed. He felt the shield go up smoothly around them both. He felt her try to thin it at one place. He felt the thinning fail and the shield collapse a little. He felt her gather it again, embarrassed. He felt her try a second time, more carefully. And on her third attempt, at the 15th minute of trying, the small, neat aperture appeared in the air, exactly the size of the stone, exactly placed. "Yes," he said softly. "It hurts," she said. "Hold it for a count of 5. We will work up to a minute by the end of the morning." She held it for 6 and let it close and let the shield drop and looked up at him with the bright, exhausted, triumphant face of a young woman who had begun, against her own expectation, to enjoy herself. By 8 o'clock, she could hold the aperture around any specified object for 43 seconds. By 11, for 2 minutes. By 2 in the afternoon, when Renesmee, who had given up trying to feed anyone but Renesmee and Jacob, came out with hot drinks for the people who would still drink them, she could hold the shield with 7 specific apertures, each at a different size, each around a different person, simultaneously. "You should rest," Harry said at last. "I'm not tired." "I know. I am, however, tired, and I am older than you, and I will sit down for a quarter of an hour, and you will sit down with me, because I do not want to teach the next part to a woman who will be too pleased with herself to listen." She laughed and sat down beside him on the porch step. She had stopped, somewhere in the morning, looking at him as if he were a strange artifact, and started looking at him as if he were a teacher she had decided to like. Harry knew the change. Most of his teachers had not, in his life, been people who deserved the turn. He took it with Bella as a small gift. "Tell me about the stone," she said. "Not today. Tell me about wizards." He looked at her sideways. "That is a 5-day question. Then tell me a piece of the answer." "All right." He took a sip from the second mug Renesmee had given him. It was tea this time. He had asked the night before for Earl Grey, and Renesmee had, without comment, gone into Forks at 6 in the morning and bought a tin of it. "We are like you. We are also not like you. We were born like other humans. We have gifts. They are different from your gifts, and they are not exactly gifts. They are an inheritance. There is a substance in our blood that everyone else also has, and which most everyone else has only in trace quantities, and which we have in enough quantity to do work with. The work is the use of magic. Magic is the use of will to put a small change in the world. The world will mostly allow this. There are places it will not. There are people it will not. There are objects that are stronger than the will of the person trying to change them, and there are objects, like the one in my pocket, that are stronger than almost anyone. How many of you are there? In the world, at the moment, perhaps 120,000. We are not many. We are very organized. We have schools. We have governments. We have mostly agreed to stay out of the lives of everyone who is not us. How are you so old? I am not sure I am supposed to be. Will you tell me? I will tell you soon if you want. I will tell Edward also. I have already told Carlyle. Today is a busy day, and when I tell stories I prefer to do it with a certain ceremony. Tonight, she nodded. She did not push. She had been, Harry thought, very well raised. He could already see it in the way she handled people, gentle but firm, with the practiced patience of an only child who had grown up watching adults make small, careful mistakes around her. She was, in many ways, better at adulthood than the older immortals around her. He had begun to understand why Edward had been undone by her. "Train me on the next thing," she said after a moment. "Stand up." She stood. He showed her then the next thing. He showed her how to take the small, complete shape of her shield and let it loose like a kite on a string into the air around them to set it free from her body without losing it. It was difficult. It took her until late afternoon to understand, and another 2 hours after that to do it, and she did not, in the end, do it well. But she did it well enough to give him hope that, in 3 days, she would be able to do it without thinking about it, and that was the most he had wanted. He spent an hour when she had collapsed onto the couch in the living room with Renesmee asleep on her shoulder with Edward. "Bella will be all right," he said. "I know." "Are you all right?" Edward did not at first answer. He was sitting at the piano in the great room, very still, his hands resting on the keys without pressing them. Harry had been told the day before that Edward played. He had not yet heard him do so, and he did not, at this hour, want to ask. He sat down in the chair beside the piano and waited. "I have always been," Edward said after a long while, "at war with the idea that I might not be enough. I have not wanted to admit it. It has been a long-running argument I have been having with myself. I have had the same argument. I imagine you have. I imagine yours has been more interesting." "It has been longer. It has not been more interesting. They are the same fight." Edward almost smiled. "I want to tell you something. Tell me." "I want to tell you that I am glad you are here. I want to tell you that even 3 days ago I could not have said that to a stranger, but I am saying it now to you because you have been kind to my wife and to my daughter, and because, although you cannot read minds, you are reading mine, and I am embarrassed by it. I am not reading yours. You are reading my face. That is the same thing in your case, and only in your case, because you have been a man whose family knows what he is thinking for 100 years, and you have stopped bothering to keep your face flat." Edward laughed, and the laugh broke into a real laugh, surprised and small, and the room, which had been quiet, went suddenly easier. "Will you," Edward said when the laugh had settled, "tell me also the thing you told Carlyle? Tonight. All right." That night, with the witnesses gone to their hunts, with the wolves on patrol at the perimeter, with Esme on the couch reading to Renesmee from a battered copy of the Velveteen Rabbit, with Carlyle and Edward and Bella around him, and Jasper, who had asked to come, and Alice, who had not asked but who had appeared anyway, Harry told them. He told them more than he had told Carlyle. He told them about Voldemort. He told them about Hogwarts and the war that had ended on the school's lawn at dawn. He told them about the 3 objects whose names he did not, even now, like to say aloud, the wand he had lost in a duel and never tried to recover, the cloak that hung in the wardrobe in the house of his oldest friend's grandson in Devon, and the stone that lay in his pocket and which he had, that morning, used as a teaching aid. He told them, finally and slowly, about the night he had walked into the woods with the 3 of them in his pocket and been killed and not stayed killed, and what it had cost him, in years of walking, to begin to make peace with the fact that the cost was probably going to be permanent. They listened. Renesmee, at the part about the stone, very quietly began to weep, the way Tanya had wept on coming through the door, not in grief exactly, but in love. Carlyle did not weep. He had heard it once already. He was watching the others. Bella's hand had found Edward's hand on the arm of the couch. Alice's eyes had not the entire time left his face. When he was done, no one spoke for some time. "All right," Alice said at last briskly, in the voice she used to keep herself from showing too much. "I have a question." "Ask." "You said the stone shows you the dead." "Yes." "Have you used it since?" "Twice. The first time was the only time I had wanted to use it. The second was a mistake. I have not, in some years, taken it out of my pocket." "Why did you take it out today?" "Because I needed a small, heavy thing to teach Bella with, and I had decided that I had been afraid of it for too long." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded once and stood up and walked across to him and bent and kissed him on the temple and walked back to her chair without saying anything about it. Jasper, beside her chair, very gently took her hand as she sat back down. "All right," Carlyle said at last. "Now my question." "What do we do about Arrow?" "That," Harry said, "I have been thinking about for 3 days. Sit down. We are going to plan." He drew with his wand a faint silver diagram in the air above the rug. It hung there like a slow firework while he spoke. He laid out what he believed Arrow would do, what he would say at the parley, how he would cross the field, where he would stand, how he would use Renata as his shield, how he would deploy Jane and Alec, how he would, when his story collapsed in front of his witnesses, look for any new excuse. He laid out what he expected Caius to do, what he expected Marcus in his slow, watchful indifference to do, what he expected Demetri to do. He laid out the tactics, person by person, that he wanted his side to use against each of them. "And you," Bella said when he had finished. "What will you do?" "I will, while we are still talking, hide myself among you. I will not be the obvious one of you. I have made myself, in a small way, a problem they are coming to investigate. I do not wish them to see me as the problem before I want them to. I will let Arrow do his examinations. I will let Bella's shield do its work. I will let the witnesses speak. If we are very lucky, we will end the day without bloodshed." "And if we are not very lucky," Carlyle said. "If we are not very lucky," Harry said, "I will step forward. I will dispel Alec's mist, which I have a way of doing. I will rebound Jane's gift, which I have a different way of doing. I will, if Arrow forces me to, look him in the eye and let him take my hand. I have considered the implications. I am willing, if it comes to it, to accept them." "What will he see?" Edward said sharply. "Everything," Harry said. "Most of which he is not equipped to survive. Most of which, he is very old. He has seen many things. Some of them will be familiar to him. Some of them, most of them, will not. Arrow is not, in his soul, a brave man. He is a curious man. He is a vain man. He is a strategic man. He has never had to look at someone he could not read and stay looking. I would like to give him that experience. I would like, after I have given him that experience, to give him the experience of being beaten in front of his own people. I do not, after that, intend to kill him. I will leave him alive because I would like him, when he goes home, to spend the next century thinking about what he saw." "You would leave Arrow alive," Alice said with interest. "I would. That is an unconventional choice. I have had time to think about it. Killing him would make a martyr. Beating him would make a story. The Volturi survive on stories. I prefer my stories with mercy in them." Edward did not at first speak. He had been studying Harry through the latter part of the conversation, with the careful attention of a man trying to memorize the shape of a thing he might never see again. Then he stood up at once, as if he had decided something, and crossed to Harry and put his hand briefly on Harry's shoulder and turned and went out of the room without saying anything at all. "He is grateful," Renesmee said quietly, "and he does not know how to say it." "I know," Harry said. "He will." "I know that too." The next morning, 800 miles south of where Harry stood at his window watching the cedars in the dawn, in a tower in Volturi, a man in a long gray cloak read a report and set it down very slowly and lifted his eyes to the painting on the wall. The painting was old. The painting was of a battle. The battle was one Arrow had not been in but had heard described by a man who had, a Romanian whose grandfather had been broken on a stick of wood by something he could not see in time. Arrow had thought about that painting many times in his very long life. He had not, until that morning, thought about it as something which might come again for him. He summoned Caius. He summoned Marcus. He summoned also the keeper of the records and asked, with his mildest smile, for the oldest book in the library. He had to wait for a small, unaccustomed moment until they came. "Brothers," he said when they were assembled, "we are going north. We are going north heavier than we had planned. And before we go, I would like to read what our predecessors believed about the wand-bearers and decide together what we believe about them now." Outside, in the long, still morning above the Tuscan hills, a bird crossed the sun and was, briefly, only a shadow. The library of the Volturi was very deep underneath the ancient palace at the heart of Volterra, and only a handful of beings on the planet had ever been allowed inside it. The room was vaulted in old stone. The shelves rose in 12 tiers, each ringed by a narrow iron walk, and the walks were reached by a single, long, beautifully wrought spiral stair. The light, by ancient agreement, was soft. The Volturi did not want to read in the dark. They had simply found that pretending to do so was good for the air of the institution. Arrow descended the stair in his slow, dancer's way, his long, red velvet overrobe trailing on the steps, and he made the three of them himself, Caius. Marcus waited at the bottom while he chose the shelf he wanted with the patience of a man who had long ago decided that ceremony was a tool, and that even his own brothers ought to be made to feel the shape of it. He moved his fingers along the spines without touching them. He spoke without turning around. "You will indulge me," he said, "while I confirm a thing I have been remembering." "You have been remembering it," Caius said dryly. "For 1,500 years, brother, we have all been remembering it. Let us read it." Arrow selected the book with a small sigh that conveyed both apology for the delay and a private pleasure in having been right about which book it was. He carried it down the floor of the library, set it on the long oak table at the center of the room, and opened it to a page he had not opened in 3 centuries. The book was bound in dark, supple leather. Its pages were the thinnest vellum. Its language was an ancient form of Tuscan that no one alive but the 3 brothers and perhaps 2 of their oldest scribes could now read. In the days of Aurelian and after, Arrow read, his voice falling into the cadence of the language as if he had been waiting his whole life to use it. "The courts of the night did agree, by treaty unwritten and witnessed by stones now lost, to put aside the war which had been made between us and the wand-bearers. For we had each lost too many, and although neither court had broken the other, both had bled. By the terms of the treaty, ours did not seek out theirs did not seek out ours did not feed upon theirs did not raise weapon against ours, and the children of either born or made did not stand on the same field while either court yet stood. The treaty was kept by both for many centuries. Of those of us who saw the wand-bearers in those last years, it was reported as follows, that they were rare in this part of the world and rarer still in the lands of our greater hold, that they could be killed by us by surprise but never reliably, that one of them, well prepared, had been seen to undo 3 of our soldiers in a single night without himself receiving any harm, that they could see us when they wished to in places where we could not be seen, and that they could, when they wished, hide themselves from our seekers and from our scryers and from the gifted of our courts, so that no eye and no nose and no sense of our kind could find them, even in a small room. It was advised by our predecessors that we never break the treaty without preparation, for the wand-bearers were judged a danger of the greatest order, and the cost of the war, if rejoined, would not be small. He closed the book gently and laid his hand flat upon it. "Demetri," he said. "Could not find him." "He could not find him," Caius repeated. "He could not place him. He could not feel his trace at any of the points at which he and I would normally have made contact." He stood at the edge of the meadow and watched the man teach 24 vampires to defend themselves, and at no point in the half-hour he was present did Demetri experience any sense of the man's position other than as a hole in his perception. The hole moved. He could mark the hole. He could not mark the man. "Are we sure," Marcus said quietly, "that he is one of these?" "No," Arrow said. We are sure that he is something very like one of these. We are not sure what else he might be. The evidence is good. Demetri's report is corroborated by an earlier note from one of our eyes in Brazil, who said 2 months ago that there had been a quiet inquiry from Olympic Coven about a man with, and I quote, an unfamiliar smell in the trees. Which inquiry our eye attributed at the time to a stray nomad with a peculiar diet. The unfamiliar smell did not turn out to be a stray nomad. The unfamiliar smell turned out to be in our path. Then we will, Caius said harshly, go heavier. That is what I have decided. The witnesses we are bringing, every guard who can be spared, every member who chooses to come, every assistant we can arm. Chelsea will be with us. Heidi will be with us. Renata, Jane, Alec, Felix, Demetri, every one of them. And we will, before we leave, prepare for the possibility that the matter of the child is not, in fact, the most interesting matter we are about to encounter. You are excited, Marcus said. I am awake, Arrow said simply. He turned to his elder brother. Forgive me, it has been some time. Marcus, for the first time in perhaps 30 years, looked up at his brother with something other than disengaged courtesy. He was tall and thin and slow, and in the light of the lamps, the planes of his face were the planes of a man who had stopped looking forward to anything in 1372 and had not lifted up his eyes since. Arrow had, very long ago, mourned with him. Arrow had more recently come to find Marcus's stillness an inconvenience. Now, for once, he saw something in his brother's face that was not stillness but its first cousin, attentiveness. Tell me, Arrow, Marcus said, if we lose this fight, what do you think happens? Arrow paused. Marcus, tell me. Plainly, we will not lose this fight. I have not asked you what we will do, I have asked you what you think happens if we do. Arrow's smile, which had been set in place since they had come down the stairs, did not quite falter. It simply went briefly thin, the way a smile thinned when the muscle holding it up was used for too long. He sat down at the head of the long oak table. He folded his hands. He considered. If we lose this fight, he said in a different voice, the witnesses tell the story. There are perhaps, by my count, 25 vampires in that meadow whom we do not control. There are, by Demetri's count, perhaps another 15 who have gone home but who would tell. There are the wolves. There is whoever the Cullens have managed to recruit who is not present at the meeting. And there is, I think it likely, at least one of the South American hybrid bloodlines who would be brought as a counter-witness if Carlyle has been thinking. There is the wand-bearer who is older perhaps than we know. The story travels. Within a year, the courts of the wider world begin to test us. Within 5, we lose Africa. Within 10, the Americas. Within 20, we are a senate of 3 old men in a small Italian town who have started, like the Romanians, to wait for visitors who do not come. That is what I thought, Marcus said. You are gloomy today, brother. I am clear today. There is a difference. Arrow looked at him for a moment longer. Then he stood up, as if dismissing the moment, and came around the table and laid his hand against Marcus's shoulder. And the touch was a courteous mistake. A touch he had used to read many of his subordinates and many of his friends, and which Marcus had, for years, allowed without flinching. Marcus, this time, very gently lifted his hand and removed Arrow's hand from his shoulder before the read was complete. Let us not, Marcus said very quietly, do that today, brother. The library for a moment was very still. Arrow inclined his head a small, courtly inclination and stepped back, and his smile, still in place, very slowly returned to its full warmth. Of course, he said. Forgive me, habit, it is forgiven. We will go, Arrow said briskly to all of them. Caius, you will brief the guard at sunrise. Marcus, I would be glad of your counsel on the order of march. Jane will go ahead with Alec on the second day. Felix will travel with the main body. Chelsea is to spend the next 48 hours with the 4 newer guard members and with Athenodora's 2 attendants. There is also, brothers, a thing I would like one of us to do, which is to send for the wives. I would like Sulpicia and Athenodora at our side. Arrow, Caius said sharply, the wives have not left Volturi in a long time, I know. I think that today I would be very glad to have them with me, the 2 of you also, and yes, he paused. I am sorry, Marcus, I had meant to say only the wives, and the word ran on. "It is all right," Marcus said. There was a silence. Even Caius did not, for a moment, find anything to say. Arrow, who had not, in some centuries, spoken his sister's name aloud where Marcus could hear it, made a small, courteous bow of his head, almost a wince, and turned, and went up the long spiral stair without looking back. Caius stayed where he was, so did Marcus. "Brother," Caius said at last in a quieter voice than he usually used. "Yes, he is afraid." "He is preparing," Marcus said. "He has not been afraid in 700 years. He may not, in fact, recognize the feeling. He thinks it is excitement. And you." Marcus turned his pale face to his brother. They had been, once, friends. They had, the three of them, built this place together. The shape of that friendship had left a soft, faint mark on his face that Caius, who had never been much for sentiment, had nonetheless never been able to ignore, and he smiled, very faintly. "I have not been afraid in 700 years either," he said. "I am, this morning, considering being interested. It is a strange feeling. I had forgotten that I was capable of it. Don't get carried away." "I will try not to." They went up the stair together. They did not speak again until they reached the high gallery and parted at the iron door. "Caius, yes, I would like to ride with you, brother, on the journey, not with Arrow." I had not expected to hear that. I had not expected to say it. "Then it is decided." The next morning, Volterra emptied. The Volturi traveled when they wished to be seen, in the way of a state visiting itself. They flew in 3 separate groups on 3 separate aircraft, owned not by themselves, but by a holding company in Cyprus that had, for 90 years, never failed to do exactly as they instructed. They came into a private airfield in northern Washington at the end of a long, windless afternoon, and they stepped down out of the planes in their long gray cloaks and their long black boots and their small, elegant pieces of antique jewelry. And they began the last leg of the journey into the woods. Jane, at the front of the second group, wore the particular small, blank smile she had been wearing in front of Arrow since she was a girl. Alec, beside her, was very still. Felix, large and easy and almost cheerful, walked with Demetri at the head of the third. Chelsea moved among the lesser guard like a woman watering a garden, touching shoulders and calling names and adjusting bonds with the small, practiced gestures of a hand long used to its work. Renata was at Arrow's left hand, as always. The wives, very rarely seen, walked behind their husbands with the wholly unhurried air of women who had not, in centuries, had to walk anywhere. They moved at last in the long Italian way, a single column of soft gray through the wet trees of the Olympic Peninsula. Demetri, who was leading, paused twice along the route, his head tilted, his eyes briefly closed, and twice he resumed without comment. Arrow, who walked behind him, watched his back and made a small, unremarkable note in his mind, and adjusted his expectations downward by an exact calibrated quantity, and did not, otherwise, give any sign of his thinking. 5 miles from the meadow, with the snow beginning to fall in a thin, considered way over the trees, Demetri stopped a third time. "Master," he said quietly, "I cannot place him, I know. He is very near, master. He has been near, I think, for the last 3 miles. I think he is walking with us. I think he has been walking with us. I cannot find him." Arrow inhaled slowly through his nose. He did not, of course, need the breath. He had stopped needing breaths in any practical sense almost 2,000 years ago. He took it for the look of the thing. Caius, at his right, had become very still. Marcus, slightly behind them, lifted his pale eyes and looked into the trees with the small, attentive look of a man who had finally found something he had been waiting to be interested in. "It is the wand-bearer," Arrow said. "It is a man, master, of the same description as the one I described earlier." "Yes. What would you have me do?" Arrow considered. He turned his head slowly, deliberately, with his most pleasant smile fixed in place, and looked into the trees on his left and into the trees on his right and back along the column behind him and forward again at Demetri. "Tell him hello, Demetri." "Master." "He is, I believe, listening to us. We have not behaved in a way that is rude. We have come in good faith, ostensibly, to a parley. He has come, ostensibly, to walk us to it. Greet him, please." Demetri, who had been a member of the guard for 1,100 years, and had not in that time been asked to greet anyone he could not see, paused a fraction of a second longer than he ordinarily would have. Then, with the particular dignity of a man who had been a soldier for too long to be made small by anything his master asked of him, he turned in the trail and bowed his head and called in his soft, polite voice into the woods, "Sir, we greet you. We hope to see you in the hours to come in the meadow." The woods did not, of course, answer. But Arrow, who was watching his subordinates back with the dispassionate intentness of a man watching an experiment, felt the small, unmistakable lift of pressure in the air, the way one feels the change in pressure when an answering breeze has begun to move. And Marcus, behind him, drew a small, surprised breath, and Demetri very faintly smiled the way a man smiled when he had been politely acknowledged by a stranger he could not see. "He has heard you, Demetri," Arrow said mildly. "Continue." The column moved on. The snow thickened. In the trees to the left of the trail, 20 paces off the path and 12 feet up among the branches of an enormous fir, a man in a coat the color of wet bark sat with his back against the trunk and watched the long gray column pass, his hand resting on his knee with the wand loose in his fingers. He did not, ordinarily, speak to people he was watching. He had thought when Demetri turned that he would simply remain silent. Then he had decided instead to be polite. He had let himself be slightly more visible to Demetri's senses for the time it took the man to bow. He had, by the smallest of arts, returned the courtesy by letting the air in front of him stir. He liked Demetri on the strength of 2 minutes' observation. He hoped he would not, in the next 48 hours, have to do anything inconvenient to the man. He waited until the last of the column had passed beneath him, and Arrow's red velvet cloak had vanished into the next bend of the trail, and the soft padding of immortal feet had faded into the ordinary creaking of cedar and snow. Then he uncoiled himself, dropped silently to the forest floor, and began to walk back the way he had come, the long way, by a path no one could feel, toward a meadow where his friends were waiting. He had wanted to take the measure of Arrow before the parley. He had taken it. He had liked one or two of the things he had seen. Marcus, in particular, was a more interesting figure than Carlyle had been able to describe, and he had disliked others. He had especially disliked the fact that Arrow had brought the wives he needed very quickly to talk to Carlyle. Chapter 6, End Chapter 7. The day before snow had begun in earnest by the time Harry came back to the house. It came down through the trees in the way of snow that did not yet know whether it would stay. It caught on his shoulders and on his hair, and it melted as it found the warmth of him and ran in small dark lines down his coat. He came up the porch steps and stamped once on the boards and went inside, and Renesmee, who had been at the window, handed him a towel without saying a word. "Carlyle," he said, "upstairs. Edward also. I'll fetch him, and Bella and Jasper and Alice. And the Romanians, please, when they come back. They were hunting with Garrett. I felt them go southeast at midnight." Renesmee nodded and was gone, silent, swift, the way a wind moved through a quiet room, and Harry climbed the stairs, 2 at a time, peeling the wet coat off as he went. In the study he laid out, in another silver diagram in the air, what he had seen on the trail. He sketched the column. He sketched the order of march. He sketched, with the small, fastidious care of a man who had once been required to draw battle plans for examiners far less merciful than these vampires, the placements of Jane and Alec and Felix and Demetri and Renata. He sketched, last, the 4 figures Arrow had walked at the back of his column. 3 of them he had expected, the 4th he had not. "He has brought the wives," he said. Carlyle's face changed. It was a small change. To anyone else in the room, it might have looked like the absence of a change. The doctor's stillness simply went a fraction stiller, the way water goes stiller when it freezes. Harry, who had watched him for 4 days now, knew the difference at once. So did Edward, who had just come up the stairs and who stopped in the doorway with a sudden, sharp glance at his father. "What does that mean?" Bella asked, looking from one to the other. "It means he is not playing for the same prize," Carlyle said quietly. "Arrow has not, in 800 years, taken Sulpicia outside the walls of Volterra. He certainly has not taken her into the field. Athenodora has not in 6. The wives are, by every law of the courts, never to be exposed. They are the foundation on which the brothers stand. He has brought them to bear witness. He intends, one way or another, that they will see something today that justifies the largest action he has taken in centuries. He intends to come home with a story he can tell. Or, Edward said slowly, to come home with us, or that, Carlyle said. Harry let the diagram dissolve in the air between them. The silver mist hung for a moment, thickened, dispersed, was gone. 3 things, he said. First, tomorrow's parley will not break the way Arrow originally planned. He has read his own predecessor's notes about us in the library this week, which I felt him do, and he is preparing for the possibility that I am, in fact, what those notes say. He is therefore overarmed. He is therefore also off balance. We will not, however, be able to count on him remaining off balance once he is in front of his witnesses. He is a vain man, and vain men recover quickly when they are watched. Second, Marcus is more attentive than I had been told to expect. I think his interest is mostly directed at his brother and not at the meadow itself. I will not assume that. Third, the bringing of the wives is not, in itself, a piece of force. It is a piece of theater. It tells me that Arrow intends today or tomorrow to do something that will be remembered. He is laying a frame inside which he will perform. We will need to step outside the frame. How do we step outside the frame? Jasper asked. He had come in some minutes before. He was leaning against the wall by the door, his arms folded, his pale eyes thoughtful. He had spoken less the last few days than any of the others. He had, however, listened with the particular concentration of a man who had been a tactician for longer than he had been almost anything else. By giving him a story he is not prepared for, Harry said. The story he has prepared for is one of 2 stories. He is either going to find that Renesmee is a normal hybrid, in which case he will look for another excuse and try to take Edward and Bella and Alice and the rest of you back with him. Or he is going to find that Renesmee is dangerous, in which case he will execute her and as many of you as he can. He has prepared a frame around both stories. The frame is that he is the lawful judge of what is and is not allowed in the courts of the night. We will not deny the frame. We will, however, give him a third story in which the lawful judge is, on this single day in this single matter, not him. And who is it? Alice said from the corner. She had come in last. She was sitting cross-legged on the floor by the desk. She had not, since her conversation with him that morning, looked at him in quite the same way. Today, Harry said, in this matter, in this clearing, it is the wand-bearers. The room went silent. They have a treaty with us, he said. I told you about it. Arrow has, in the last 3 days, read the version of the treaty that has been preserved in his library. I have, in the last 3 weeks, asked an old colleague in Marrakesh to send me, by means I will not bore you with, the version of the treaty that has been preserved in ours. Both versions agree on 3 things. First, that neither court will hunt the other. Second, that neither court will raise weapons against the other. Third, that the children of either, born or made, will not stand on the same field while either court yet stands. The Volturi are about to violate the 3rd clause. Renesmee is the child of Edward and Bella. Renesmee is, by any reasonable reading, also a child of the night. She is, in the strict letter of the treaty, a child of either court. They are about to step onto a field with her, with weapons drawn. They will be in violation. I will, in front of the witnesses they have brought and the witnesses we have brought, declare them in violation. It is not the only thing I will do. It is the thing I will do in front of the wives. Will the treaty hold any force? Bella asked. I mean, with the witnesses. It will hold the force of any old, solemn promise made between 2 old, solemn powers, Harry said. It will hold the force, particularly, of a promise that they have not been made to remember in some centuries. It will not, by itself, win the day. It will, however, change the pretext under which they have come. They will have come thinking they were coming as judges. They will discover that they have come as defendants. Arrow will not enjoy it. The wives, in particular, will not enjoy it. The witnesses will be told a thing they have not been told before. Some of them will, in the years to come, remember this moment as the moment they first considered that the Volturi were not, in fact, the ultimate court. You have, Carlyle said slowly, been planning this for some time. Yes. I would have done it less well a week ago. I am better now, having met you. Carlyle smiled. It was a small, weary, grateful smile. All right, he said. I am with you, Edward. I am with you, Edward said. Bella, of course. Jasper. With you, Jasper said. Tactically, I will note that the speech is, at best, half of what we will need. Tactically, you are right, Harry said. I will tell you the rest. Sit down. He told them the rest. He told them about Alex Mist and about how he intended to burn it off the field. He told them about Jane's gift and about how he intended to make it rebound against her. He told them about Arrow and about how, if it came to it, he intended to make Arrow touch his hand and see what was inside Harry. He told them about Renata's gift, which deflected by preemption, and about the small spell he had been preparing that would, briefly, confuse it. He told them about Demetri, whom he liked, and whom he intended to incapacitate in a way that did not require killing. He told them about Felix, who was a thug with a heart of his own, and whom he intended to put to sleep with a curse he had not used in 100 years, and which still, in his fingers, felt familiar. He told them about Caius, whom he had not seen properly yet, but whom he was watching for and against, whom he had a particular plan that involved Carlyle and a small, bitter old grudge that Caius had been carrying for centuries. You have prepared, Edward said slowly. A different plan for every one of them? Yes, you have been studying them for 4 days. I have been cheating in some respects. I have been using my own gifts to listen at certain doors which I should perhaps not have been listening at. I will not apologize for it. I have been preparing on this short notice a plan that does not require me to kill anyone. You hope, Jasper said. I hope. I also have the harder plans ready if they are needed. They will not be needed unless we are very unlucky. And the wolves? Edward asked. The wolves, Harry said, are the biggest piece of muscle in the meadow. They do not have to die for us to win. I will work with Jacob after this on what they are to do. I will tell him to keep his pack at the trees until I have spoken. I will tell him when I have spoken that he will know what to do. He will know. Edward said with a small smile. He always does, I have noticed. The conversation went on. They went over the ground until past midnight. They went over each name, each gift, each line of attack. They went over the contingencies. What would happen if Arrow broke the rules, if he refused to listen, if he attempted to kill Renesmee in front of his witnesses? If Caius decided to start something on his own, if Jane lost control, if the wolves got angry. They went over the lines on which, if all else failed, Bella would project her shield as widely as she could, and the line on which, if even that failed, Harry would step forward and do what he had hoped not to do. Sometime around 2 in the morning, Esme brought up 2 pots of tea and a plate of biscuits she had bought in town. She set them down on the desk, kissed Edward on the temple, kissed Carlyle on the temple, very briefly laid her hand against the back of Harry's hand and left. Harry, for the second time in 5 days, found himself unable to speak for a moment. He had not, in many years, been the recipient of a kindness from someone whose name he was just beginning to learn. By 3, the meeting had ended. Alice and Jasper had gone out to walk the perimeter. Bella had gone home to Edward's cottage by the river. Carlyle had gone, very gently, to find his wife. Edward had gone to find Renesmee. Harry, alone in the study, sat by the window for some time and looked into the snow. He went down eventually and out into the great room. The fire in the hearth, which Esme had been keeping for him for 4 nights now, burned low and steady. The Velveteen Rabbit was, again, on the couch, bookmarked at the same page by the same small piece of folded notepaper. The room was empty. You should sleep, a voice said very softly. He turned. He had not, until now, felt her come down the stairs. The wards on his hearing were still up. She had been, in any case, very quiet. Renesmee stood at the foot of the staircase in a long, pale nightgown, with her dark, red-brown hair loose down her shoulders, looking at him with the wide, grave eyes that had never, in his 5 days of knowing her, learned to hide anything. I should, he agreed. I am bad at it. Mama said you were tired. Mama is right. I am very tired. She came across the rug to him without any particular hurry, the way a small child came to an adult she had decided to like, and she put her hand against his hand on the arm of the chair and showed him 3 things in succession. She showed him a clearing in the snow, the same clearing she had shown him in the woods on the first day. The Cullens were standing in a line. She herself was at the front of the line. Behind the line on her left was Harry. The image was, again, a hope. She showed him a room, this room, in fact, the one they were in, at some season other than winter. The trees outside the window were green. The fire was unlit. The couch was occupied in a casual, careless way by Bella, by Edward, by Renesmee herself, as a young woman, perhaps 15 years older than the child in front of him, no longer a child at all. There were others in the room he could not, at first place. Then he saw, with a small soft shock, that one of them was him. She showed him last a thing she had not shown him before. She showed him what looked at first like a memory of his own, and was indeed his own, but it had not, until that moment, been hers. He saw the woods at Hogwarts at dawn. He saw himself, 18 years old and barefoot, standing at the edge of a small clearing where the figure of a man in a hood was waiting for him. He saw the small, heavy stone in his own hand. He saw the figures that came when he turned the stone, a young man with a sad, handsome face, a young woman with dark, wild hair, an older man with kind, tired eyes, a tall, thin woman with shocking pink hair. He saw himself walk on. He saw himself fall. He saw himself after standing again. She took her hand back. He stared at her for some time. He could not at first speak. "You did not see that," he said at last hoarsely. "I did not show that to you. You showed me in the field," she said. It was the longest sentence he had heard her say. Her voice was small and clear, the voice of a child who had been told to sound her age and was making a generous effort. "When you let Mama look at her shield, I felt it. I am sorry. I did not mean to take. I gave it back. Renesmee, it is all right," she said. "They love you." "The pink-haired one is. I think she is the one whose son was your son?" "Yes. She told me to tell you that he is well, and that he has met his grandfather, and that they are all right where they are." He did not, for a moment, breathe. He was not, of course, required to. He had never had Carlyle's discipline about that. He had simply, for a moment, forgotten how. "She told you that," he said finally, very softly. "Yes, Renesmee. Yes, you are an extraordinary child. Mama tells me that," she said. "I think she is biased." He laughed helplessly, and the laugh broke into something else, and he set his elbow against the arm of the chair and put his hand over his eyes and let himself, for a small, unmeasured moment, be a man who had just been told by a small child that the people he had loved most and lost first were. In fact, all right, when he lowered his hand again, she was still standing by his chair. She had, with great patience, waited for him. "Thank you," he said. "You're welcome. Will you come and sit with me a moment?" "Yes." She climbed up and curled against his side and tucked her small, warm head against his shoulder. And the two of them, the immortal wizard and the half-vampire child, sat together on the couch in front of the low fire while the snow came down in earnest outside the great glass walls. He did not, that night, go up to bed. Esme found them, near dawn, asleep on the couch together, Renesmee with her small hand curled around 2 fingers of his, Harry with his head fallen sideways onto the back of the cushion. Esme, very carefully, very quietly, folded a blanket over the 2 of them, kissed her granddaughter on the forehead and left them where they lay. Outside, the snow had stopped. The morning was very still. In the trees at the perimeter, 6 wolves moved in patient pairs through the deep new white. 5 miles south, in a low building on a private airfield, a column of pale figures in long gray cloaks had finished its rest and begun to walk north. The day they had all been waiting for had begun. Chapter 7 and Chapter 8. The field the clearing had, in the days when the witnesses had been arriving, been unremarkable. A shallow bowl of grass surrounded on all sides by tall, dark cedar and a margin of younger fir, with a small thread of stream running through one corner. By the morning of the parley, it had become something else. The snow had taken it. It was a white plate set down between the trees, lined at the edges with the unmoving figures of immortals who had begun, before sunrise, to file in. The Cullens stood at the center of their line, with Carlyle at the precise middle and Esme on his left and Edward on his right, and Bella beside Edward, with Renesmee on her hip. Renesmee, awake at this hour for the first time since she had been born, had been bundled in a small dark coat with a hood, and she was holding her mother's hand with both of her own, and she was not, as far as Harry could see, afraid. The wolves stood at the trees behind them, in fur, their breath in long, slow plumes. Jacob, who had come up to Renesmee in human form before going back to the trees and his pack, was a russet-coated bulk just behind Bella's right shoulder, his great head lowered in attention. The witnesses spread out from the Cullens in two long, patient wings. Tanya's family on the left, near the Cullens, Vladimir and Stefan in their black coats further down, the Egyptians, the Irish, the Amazons, the nomads, all in their own small clusters. 25 witnesses, 6 wolves. 8 Cullens, 1 half-vampire child. Harry stood at the very end of the right wing, a little apart in the open, with a long dark coat and a long dark scarf and his hands in his pockets and the wand at his wrist. He had not, this morning, been hidden among his friends. He had, by his own choice, come into the clearing first. He had walked across it in the deep blue dawn, alone, his footprints the only ones in the new snow. He had stood, as the others arrived, at the position he had chosen the night before, 20 paces from the Cullens in the open. Near a single dark fir, he had wanted this morning to be seen. He had spent the early walk with Renesmee, holding her hand. He had spent 5 minutes with Edward, 1 with Carlyle, and 20 with Bella. He had said little to any of them. There had been little left to say. He had last gone to Esme, who had taken his face briefly in both her cool hands and looked at him without smiling and then let him go. And he had walked out across the clearing without looking back. Now he waited. He felt the Volturi before they came into view. He had felt them all morning in the slow, broad way of his sensitivity to them, pressing forward through the trees. He felt the wives, who walked at the rear, with an attention he had not yet given to any of the other figures. He felt Arrow near the front, talking to Caius in a low voice. He felt Marcus, slightly behind, walking alone. Then, all at once, they were at the trees, and then in the trees, and then in their long, beautifully arranged column in the meadow. The Volturi were, Harry would tell himself afterward, exactly as he had been led to expect, and entirely different. They were exact in their formation. They were exact in their pacing. They came across the snow in a single long rank, the way an army came across a snowfield in old paintings, and the air around them was very cold and very still. They stopped, all of them, simultaneously, at 50 paces from the Cullen line, and their cloaks ceased moving, and they stood with the perfect, terrifying steadiness of a single body. What was different was the faces. Arrow's face was a face Harry had been expecting since he had crossed into Forks. He had been told it would be charming. It was. It was the face of a man who had charmed his way through 10 centuries of awkward dinners. It was the face of a host at his own party. The eyes, however, were the eyes of a calculation. Caius's face, narrower, paler, more obviously tired, was the face of a man who had been a soldier. Marcus's face was the face of a saint who had stopped believing. Behind them, Sulpicia and Athenodora, the 2 wives, stood in pale ivory cloaks at the rear of the column, their hoods back, their faces calm in the deliberate way of women who had been instructed to stand calmly. Beside Arrow stood Renata, smaller and younger and visibly afraid, the only one of the entire body whose face was not arranged to be a single perfect surface. Arrow stepped forward. He took not 5 paces, but precisely 7, Harry counted. He smiled, the wide, generous, helpless smile of a man very glad to see old friends. He spread his hands. "Carlyle," he said in a voice that filled the clearing. "Old friend." "Arrow," Carlyle said, "it has been too long. It has. You will, I hope, forgive my somewhat imposing arrival. We come on a matter of grave importance to our courts. We come also in the hope that this matter may be resolved with." He glanced up smoothly, taking in the witnesses on either side, the wolves, the meadow, with as little unpleasantness as may be possible. "That is also our hope." Carlyle said, "You have brought me witnesses, my friend. I commend you. I have brought my own. We are very visible here today. Let us do well by ourselves." "Yes, I am told," Arrow said smoothly, "that the matter at hand is the existence of a child. Will you present her to me?" "I will." Carlyle took 2 steps back. Edward and Bella, with Renesmee between them, came forward. The witnesses on both sides, who had not yet seen Renesmee in many cases, made small, shifting motions of attention. Vladimir, on the right, leaned forward by a fraction. Stefan, beside him, did the same. The Egyptians did not move. Tanya, at the head of her family, set her hand at the base of her sister's spine. "Bella," Arrow said with the practiced warmth of an old uncle. "And Edward, my friend, I am glad to see you both. Will you bring her to me, please? You may approach us." Edward said evenly, "I will not bring her." The smallest pause. Arrow's smile did not change. He inclined his head, said, "Of course," and crossed the snow toward them. Renata, his shield, paced at his shoulder. He stopped 4 paces from the family. He looked at Renesmee. His face, very briefly, did the thing Harry had been watching for. The smile thinned by a thread, the eyes widened by a thread. He inhaled. He became, for half a second, a man who was very surprised and who did not know what to do with the surprise, and who was also very pleased, because surprises were something Arrow had been craving for centuries. "My dear child," he said softly, "will you let me see your hand? You may take mine." Edward said, "And look at her through me." "I would prefer hers." "You may have mine." Arrow smiled again and inclined his head, the courteous loss of a small skirmish, and held out his hand to Edward. Edward gave him his hand. Arrow held it. The reading went on for some time. Harry watched the man's face. He watched the small, almost invisible adjustments of expression as Arrow's gift sifted through 14 decades of his son's mind. He watched, in particular, the moment Arrow found the relevant facts. The impossible pregnancy, the half-human birth, the quick and visible growth, the red blood in the child's veins, the heartbeat, the gift of the touch, Carlyle's careful records, the witnesses summoned. The tactical preparations of the last week. He watched, also, the moment Arrow encountered Harry. The man's face did not change. His grip on Edward's hand did not change. But Harry felt, at that moment, the very slight, very specific tension of a legilimens who had run into a wall and had decided, immediately, not to react to having run into the wall. Arrow's eyes, for a fraction of a second, flicked sideways across the clearing, found Harry where he stood near the dark fir, and went back to Edward's face. "Thank you, my friend," Arrow said gently, and let go. He turned. He took again exactly 7 steps back. He resumed his place in the line. "Brothers," he said, and his voice was now pitched to fill the clearing. "I have looked. The child is not, as we had been told, an immortal child. The child is something different. The child is, and you will be as astonished by this as I was, my brothers, a hybrid. A mixed birth of human mother and vampire father. Such things are old. Such things are not, in themselves, against our laws. I withdraw, brothers, the charge of immortal child crime of which the Cullens are, unambiguously, innocent." A long ripple, like the first ripple of a wind on a still lake, ran through the witnesses on both sides. Caius made an angry, disappointed sound. Arrow, without turning his head, raised one hand to him in a small, stilling gesture. "That said," Arrow went on, his voice silkier now, "we did not come this far for nothing. There are matters which my looking at our friend Edward has revealed to me which we ought to address, brothers, in front of all our witnesses, that we may be sure—" "Arrow." The word, spoken not loudly but carrying, came from Harry. He had not, until that moment, spoken. Arrow turned. The whole clearing turned with him. "Yes," Arrow said, smiling in his most charming voice. "And to whom do I have the honor of speaking?" "My name is Harry Potter," Harry said. "I am here on behalf of the third party to your treaty." The clearing went very, very still. Arrow's face, for a long moment, did not move. "The third party," he said, "to the treaty made in the days of Aurelian and after. I quote it in the version preserved at our schools. And the children of either, born or made, did not stand on the same field while either court yet stood. You have, in coming to this meadow with weapons drawn against a child of our shared night, broken the 3rd clause of that treaty. I am here on the behalf of my own court to inform you that you are in violation." Arrow's head tilted very slightly. He had been bested briefly in front of his witnesses, and it was clear from the careful arrangement of his face that he was, for the first time in some centuries, calculating very fast. "My dear Mr. Potter," he said, his voice falling into a more measured register. If we are speaking of the old treaties, and I will admit with some pleasure that I had not expected to do so today, then you and I are, both of us, in a matter of careful diplomacy. We had not intended to break the Treaty of Aurelian. We had intended, to the best of our knowledge, to address a matter of our own laws. We did not, in doing so, expect to find a representative of your court. You did not expect to find one, Harry agreed. You will, in your library, find a passage which advises that you not break the treaty without preparation. You read that passage 3 nights ago. You have, in the days since, been preparing. I will allow that you may not have intended a violation. I will not, however, allow that you have not committed one. A tiny, knife-thin smile crossed Arrow's face, the smile of a man who had been caught in a small lie by another player in a long game and who had begun, against his will, to be entertained. You have been listening at our doors, Arrow said. I have. That is, in itself, a violation of our laws. It is. We will agree to put it on the same scale with yours. I would, Arrow said, that we discuss this matter in private. I would not. Your witnesses are owed a statement in their hearing that you have committed a violation of an old treaty in their presence. My witnesses are owed the same. I will give it. Brothers, sisters of the night, you have heard. The Volturi have come to a meadow with weapons drawn against a child of either court. They are in violation of the Treaty of Aurelian. Take it home. Tell it to those who were not here. The Volturi may be, in many matters, the lawful judges of our shared night. They are not, in this matter, on this day, in this clearing, the lawful judges of anything. The witnesses behind him moved. There was a soft, deep, unmistakable thrum of approval, the kind of sound a court made when the verdict it had been waiting for had finally been pronounced. Arrow's smile did not change. Caius, beside him, took half a step forward. Arrow, without looking, raised one hand again and stopped him. You are very young, Mr. Potter, Arrow said gently, to be quoting the old treaties at me. I am, in fact, older than I look, Harry said. I am older than your library knows. I will, however, accept the courtesy of being thought young. Will you tell me your age? I am 146, by the calendar your library knows. Arrow's eyes narrowed. They narrowed, and then, for the first time, he glanced past Harry briefly into the trees with the small, involuntary look of a man checking for cover. You are very interesting, Mr. Potter. Thank you. You are also alone. I am, in this clearing, the only one of my court. I am not in this clearing alone. Arrow's eyes flicked down the wing to Bella briefly and back. I am told, in fact, that you have been training my friend Carlyle's family, that you have been, in particular, training my dear Bella, whose gift has, I see, through Edward, been growing. I commend the work. It is well done. Thank you. And yet I will say, gently, with the regard of a man who has, after all, only met you this hour, that you have placed yourself in a difficult position. Your treaty, in spirit, requires that you not seek us out. You have. We are inclined to consider this generosity on your part an extension of the long peace between us. We do not wish to consider it as the breaking of the treaty by the third party. You will not need to. The third party comes, in this case, by invitation of one of our number, in defense of the third clause against an active violation. The treaty allows it. Your library, if you read further, will say so. I have read further. A very small, surprised laugh escaped Arrow. It was, Harry thought, the most honest sound he had so far made. You have been thinking, Mr. Potter, for some weeks, for some days. I work quickly. Brothers, Arrow said lightly, turning as if to confer. It seems we have what shall we call it, a complication. Caius, my dear, please be patient. Marcus. He held out his hand to Marcus, who had until that moment been standing in absolute stillness behind Arrow's shoulder, looked at the offered hand for a long, slow moment. Then very gently he turned his face toward Sulpicia, who was standing pale and silent at the rear of the column, and toward Athenodora, who was standing beside her, and finally back toward his brother. He did not, in the end, give Arrow his hand. Marcus. Brother. Marcus said, and his voice was the voice of a very tired old man. I will think for a moment, if you will allow me. Arrow's face did not move. The clearing did not move. Far in the trees, very softly, a wolf moved one paw in the snow and then was still again. Of course, Arrow said gently. Of course, he turned back. His smile had returned in full force. He spread his hands. Mr. Potter, he said, will you speak to me then of remedies? You allege a violation. You will not allow that the violation was inadvertent. I have already withdrawn the principal charge. What is it in this clearing that you and I are to do? Withdraw, Harry said simply. Take your column home. Allow that you found nothing of interest in the Olympic Peninsula. Allow that your friend Carlyle is, as he has always been, an honorable man, and that the witnesses on both sides have made the long walk for very little. Take your wives back to Volterra. Tell them that you saw a child who was not what you had been led to believe, and a friend who has done what an honorable man would do, and go home and read your library more attentively in the next century. That is the remedy. There is no other on offer. He had been preparing in the last few days several other speeches. He had decided on the walk to the meadow to give only the shortest of them. Arrow was a man who responded best to compression, a silence. Then Arrow, and Harry had been waiting for the moment, the very slightly different turn of his smile, the small indrawing of breath, gave a soft, regretful sigh, the way a host gave a small, regretful sigh when the dinner had not gone as he had hoped. Jane, my dear. Arrow said mildly without looking around. Jane stepped forward. She looked at Bella, who was holding Renesmee on her hip in the line. She looked at Renesmee. Her gift was not, Harry thought afterward, an attack so much as a question, a small, terrible, polite question asked of a body that the body inevitably failed to answer well. Pain, the making of pain in another's mind. He had been preparing for the question for days. He stepped in the same moment half a pace forward. He felt Bella's shield go up in the same instant. He felt it close around Renesmee, around Edward, around the rest of the line. He felt Jane's gift hit it. He felt the gift slide. The gift did not catch. Renesmee, on her mother's hip, looked across the meadow at the small blonde girl with the black eyes and tilted her head. Jane's face, for the first time in centuries, moved. Alec, Arrow murmured. Alec's mist began. It came out of his small, smooth body in the way of fog lifting off a still lake, a low, seeping, almost beautiful drift of pale gray vapor, thin at first, then thickening, rolling forward across the snow in a long, slow advance. It was older magic than Harry had been told. It moved with the deliberate, gathering weight of something that had been used to put down rebellions in cities long since burned to the ground. It came across the snow, and as it came, the witnesses behind him, even the Romanians, drew briefly back. Harry took one step forward. He took the wand out of his sleeve. He did not raise it high. He held it at hip level. He drew in a single clean, slow line, a wide horizontal arc through the air in front of him, and the line was for a brief, perfect moment visible, a sweep of pale gold light that hung 3 feet off the snow in the air across half the meadow. He flicked the wand once downward and let go. The line of gold light snapped open into a single broad sheet of soft, even fire. It was not orange. It was not yellow. It was a clean white gold, the color of autumn light through high windows, and it did not, in the way of ordinary fires, consume what it touched. It poured forward, low across the meadow, the height of a man's hip, and it ate the mist where it found it. The mist went up in a thin sigh of steam. The fire moved on, polite and unhurried, until it had reached Alec's feet and stopped exactly there and burned for a moment longer in a wide, bright fan and went out. Alec, who had not been touched, took a small involuntary step back. The clearing, in the quiet that followed, was full of the smell of sun on wet stone. That, Harry said calmly into the quiet, was your free move. I am not, brothers, going to give you another. Arrow, very slowly, lifted his eyes from the place where the fire had been. His face, for the first time that morning, was the face of a man who had, in fact, been afraid. Then he smiled in the wide, slow, terrible way of a man who had decided, at last, to enjoy himself, and he raised one pale hand and brought it sharply down. The Volturi guard moved. Chapter 8 and Chapter 9. The reckoning. The first thing the Volturi guard did was the thing they had been trained to do, and it was not, for any of them, a thing they had been trained to do without the support of Alec's mist around them. The mist had been their cover for 2,000 years. It had unmade armies. It had gone, this morning, in the time it took a wand to draw a single arc, and the men and women of the guard, for the first time in their long careers, had to fight in the open. Felix went straight at Bella. He came across the snow in the long, low, terrible way of a great cat, the white cloak streaming, and Harry, who had been watching for him, did the small particular thing he had been preparing all week. He did not, in fact, throw a curse at Felix. He flicked the wand sideways in a short arc and laid, between Felix's path and the Cullen line, a strip of air 30 feet wide and 4 feet thick that was, for the next 6 seconds, simply not the same air it had been a moment before. It was thicker. It was colder. It pulled. Felix, at his full speed, hit it as if he had hit a wall of cold mud, and his momentum, which would have driven him bodily through Renesmee, instead carried him at half speed into the strip and stopped him, 3 feet inside it. With his fist outstretched and his face fixed in the rigid expression of a man who had been preparing to land a blow that had not, in the end, arrived. "You don't have to fight me, Felix," Harry said mildly, walking forward. "Step back out of it. You don't owe him this. You can go home. You can think about whether you want to come back." Felix's eyes, which had not, until that moment, been able to move, slid sideways toward Arrow. Arrow, who had himself just begun to move, did not look at Felix. Arrow was looking at Harry. Harry, with a small flick of his wand, dropped the slow air. Felix staggered free of it, 1 step, 2, and then, to the great visible surprise of the rest of the guard, he stayed where he was. He did not, in the next minute, do anything at all. He stood, breathing hard, his fist loose at his side, and he looked at Harry, and he looked at Arrow, and he made, very slowly in front of all his colleagues, the choice of a man who had been told for 2,000 years not to make choices. Arrow saw it. His face, which had, for an instant, been preparing to register triumph, went a degree colder. "Demetri," Arrow said sharply. "Heidi. Take the wand-bearer now." Demetri did not, Harry noticed, move at his full speed. He came forward at the speed of a man performing a duty he was no longer, this morning, sure of. Heidi came at her full speed. Harry, who had been holding the small particular spell for Heidi in his free hand for some minutes, tossed it lightly at her in a flick of motion that was less a curse than an offered gift, a soft, quiet, sleeping curse, an old anesthetic dating from the 17th century. Designed for people one wished to incapacitate but did not wish to harm, and Heidi, in the middle of her strides, slowed, blinked, sat down rather elegantly in the snow and laid herself onto her side and was asleep. Demetri stopped. "Sir," Harry said courteously, "I would prefer not to do that to you. I liked the way you greeted me on the trail. Will you take 3 steps back?" Demetri took 3 steps back. The rest of the guard came in the same instant, in a wave, and the witnesses behind Harry and the Cullens and the wolves who had been waiting at the trees came also in the same instant forward. The clearing dissolved into motion. Harry did not, in the chaos, lose his focus. He had been in chaos before. He moved across the field with the small, unhurried, surgically precise quickness of a man who had learned, very long ago, that speed in a battle was less important than placement. He laid down a series of short, sharp wards at 4 points around the Cullen line, behind Bella's shield, that would catch any vampire crossing them and hold him for 3 seconds. He pushed Renata sideways out of Arrow's path with a small puff of pressurized air that did not hurt her, but which she, in her preparation against attack, had not been built to expect. He caught Stefan's wrist as Stefan went past him on the way to engage one of the lesser guard, and said in his most conversational voice, "If you can possibly avoid killing him, brother, I will count it a favor." And Stefan, surprised, said, "I will see what I can do," and was gone before Harry had finished the sentence. He saw, out of the corner of his eye, Caius launch himself at Carlyle. He had been preparing for it for 2 days. Caius came in low, his cloak streaming, with the absolute white murderous focus of a man who had spent 800 years deciding that Carlyle Cullen was an affront to the natural order. He hit Carlyle full in the chest. They went into the snow together. Caius's hand, which carried no weapon and had never needed one, found Carlyle's throat. Harry crossed the distance in 2 long strides. He did not, in the moment, throw a spell at Caius. He had decided days before that what Caius needed was not a spell. He set his hand against Caius's white cloaked shoulder, not hard, and he said, in the language Caius had been born speaking, 2 words. He had practiced those 2 words for an evening and a morning. He had been told them, very long ago, by an old wizard from Athens who had spent some time in his youth being interested in the courts of the Mediterranean. He did not, on most days, have any particular reason to know the language. He had it this morning because he had been preparing for 2 days the small specific thing that would, in this man, work. Caius froze. He froze because, in the words Harry had just spoken, words in his lost dialect, the one he had not heard since he had been a man, Harry had spoken the name of his sister. The sister Caius had not been able to save. The sister whose name had not been spoken aloud, near him in any language for 600 years. Caius lifted his face. His eyes in that moment were the eyes of a much younger man. "Brother," Harry said gently, not in any language but plain English. "You have been carrying this for a very long time. Carlyle is not the man who took her from you. He has never been. You have known this. Stand up, please. Walk back to your line. You will not, today, kill him." Caius did not at first move. Then, with the slow, dazed movement of a man waking from a long dream, he let go of Carlyle's throat. He pushed himself off Carlyle's chest. He stood up. He did not say anything. He turned around in the snow and walked in his full dignity in his red boots, back across the meadow toward his own line, and he did not look at Arrow, and he did not look at his wife, and he stopped, 2 paces in front of where he had started, and he stood there, his face a faintly gray color. With his cloak still streaming, his hands at his sides, he did not, for the rest of the morning, raise them. Harry helped Carlyle to his feet. Carlyle, who had a fine, clean bruise at the side of his throat, the kind of bruise vampires did not, ordinarily, get, looked up at Harry with the small, pale, astonished face of a man who had, in his 3.5 centuries, just been pulled out from under his oldest enemy. "Thank you." He said, "Stay near Esme," Harry said. "The next part is mine." He turned. He found among the chaos Jane, who had up until that moment been trying her gift against various of the witnesses with no particular success, had at last understood that her gift was not today going to succeed. She had not understood, however, what to do about that. She had stopped at the front of the Volturi line and she was watching Bella, and the look on her face was not, anymore, the look of a sweetly violent child. It was the look of a child who had been told, for the first time in her very long life, no. Harry crossed the clearing toward her. He did not lift his wand. He did not even look at her with any particular focus. He came to within 6 paces of her and he stopped and he said very gently, "Jane." She looked up. "You may, if you wish, try your gift on me. I will not punish you for it. I will, however, send it back." She did not, at first, do anything. Then, with the small, sharp, fierce, instinctive movement of a child who has been challenged to do the thing she has spent her life perfecting, she did. He felt her gift hit him. He felt it hit the wards he had built around himself, and he felt it slide along the wards, and he felt it gather. He felt also the small, careful, mirrored ward he had been preparing for an hour. He moved his fingers very slightly in a counterclockwise turn at his waist. The mirrored ward folded sweetly, the way a folded piece of paper folded, and turned the gift back along the line of its own approach. And Jane, who had not been hit by her own gift in 900 years, was hit by her own gift. She fell very neatly onto her knees in the snow, and she screamed. It was not a long scream. Harry let it go for a count of 2 and then folded the rebound neatly down and shut it. Jane, on her knees, breathing in great, shaking, unnecessary breaths, looked up at him. "That is what it feels like," Harry said quietly. "I will not do it to you again. I will, however, ask you to stop." She did not at first speak, then slowly she nodded. Alec behind her lifted his hand. He had been preparing the mist again. Harry, without looking, flicked his wand once toward him. The mist, in the moment of its forming, snuffed itself out the way a candle snuffed out in a draught. Alec's hand, halfway up, paused. He looked at Harry. Harry shook his head very slightly. Alec lowered his hand. By that time the rest of the field had begun to settle. Vladimir and Stefan, with the help of Garrett and Elizar, had brought down two of the lesser guard members, neither of them, mercifully, by the throat. They had pinned them in the way Harry had quietly asked. The wolves had taken the perimeter and broken two of the guard who had attempted to flank Bella's shield from behind. Jacob, his russet bulk on top of one of them, had not killed the man but had, at Harry's instruction, broken three of his arms and was, at this moment, sitting on him in a way that suggested a long afternoon was in store. Benjamin had thrown a small, controlled gout of flame between Felix and Heidi when Felix had shown signs of, in his uncertainty, drifting. Bella, holding her shield steady at the center, had not, in the past 4 minutes, allowed any of the Volturi attacks to touch her family. Renesmee, beside her, was simply watching. She was, Harry observed, not afraid, that left Arrow. Arrow had not, in the 4 minutes of fighting, moved more than a step. Renata had been at his elbow. He had been, in the way of a long-practiced general, watching. He saw now that the field had turned. He saw also that several of his guard had simply stopped fighting, and that the wives were watching him with faces he had not, in some centuries, seen on them. Sulpicia, in particular, with the small, careful look of a woman wondering whether the man she had married was, after all, a man she was prepared to keep. He did not, in his face, betray any of it. He smiled. "Mr. Potter," he said, "you are even more interesting than I had hoped. Arrow, I will offer you, in good faith, a parley." "I will accept it." Arrow held out his hand. It was a deliberate, ceremonial gesture, the courtly invitation of one general to another at the close of a contested field to have words. He had not, in offering it, given any sign that he intended to use his gift. He did not have to. They both knew in the moment of the offer what the gift was for. Harry walked across the snow. He stopped, 2 paces from Arrow. He looked at the hand for a long moment. He looked then at Arrow's face. Arrow met his eyes with the small, anticipatory smile of a man who had been preparing all morning for this. Behind Arrow, the wives had grown very still. "You will not," Harry said gently, "see what you are expecting." "My dear young man," Arrow said, "there is nothing on this earth I have in 800 years expected to see." "There is today, Arrow." He took Arrow's hand. He did not flinch. He did not even brace. He had decided, in his cottage in Wales in 1953, the 3rd time he had failed to die, that he was not going to flinch from the consequences of his strange life ever again. He had not always kept that promise. He kept it now. Arrow's eyes closed. The reading was the longest reading Arrow had ever performed. He could not, of course, have known it. He could only have known the weight of it, the great long press of 146 years of memory crowding through his gift in a single, terrible rush. He saw first the obvious things: the school, the wars, the wand, the cloak, the stone, the moment in the woods where Harry had been killed and not stayed killed. He saw, second, the less obvious things: Teddy growing up, Hermione growing old, Ron beside her, the slow, accumulating weight of all the years after. He saw, third, the things Harry had not even allowed himself to remember in some time. The strange, dreamlike walk through the Russian summer in 1923 when he had finally tried, for the 2nd time, to die. The patient, quiet face of the very old boatman who had ferried him to the shore where Death herself was waiting, Death looking at him gently, as if at a child who had refused to come home for dinner. He saw, last, the thing Harry had been waiting to show him. He saw Voldemort. He saw, in Harry's memory, the small, white, snake-eyed figure of a man who had outlived his own death, who had cut his own soul into pieces, who had built a court and a guard and a frame around himself and ruled half a country with the quiet, charming, narcissistic terror of a man who could not bear to be defied. He saw Voldemort at his height. He saw Voldemort at Hogwarts. He saw Voldemort at dawn, struck dead by his own rebounded curse, on the lawn of a school whose names Arrow did not know. He saw, very faintly, in the inside corners of Harry's memory of that morning, the face of every fascist Harry had ever in the long century after met and unmade. He saw in himself in that gallery a small reflection. He let go. He did not, at first, step back. He looked at Harry. His face, which had been arranged for 2,000 years in a single fixed expression of charming amusement, had begun to come undone. The eyes were the eyes of a man who had been shown, suddenly, his own portrait in a gallery he had not known he was hanging in. The mouth very faintly was open. "Arrow," Harry said gently. "Yes. Take your column home." Yes. It was not, of course, decided in that single word. The wives behind Arrow had drawn closer to him now. Sulpicia had laid one hand on his arm and was looking at Harry, and her face was the face of a woman who had not, in some centuries, been so unsettled. Caius, 2 paces behind, had not raised his eyes from the snow. Marcus and Harry watched him for a long moment. Marcus was looking at his brother with the look of a man who had, this morning, been freed for the first time in centuries from a small, persistent compulsion he had not, until this moment, been able to identify. Chelsea, somewhere behind the line, had gone very still. The bonds she had been holding had, in the chaos, begun to slip. Marcus, free of them for the first time since the death of his wife, looked in the cold of the meadow around him, and he saw what his brother had become, and he saw what the courts of the night had become because of it, and he, very gently, said one word. "Arrow." Arrow turned. His face was still not entirely his own. "Yes, brother. Let us go home." Arrow nodded. He did not look at Harry again. He did not look at his guard. He did not look at his wife. He turned and he walked, with the unhurried, perfectly paced grace of a man who had spent 2,000 years walking with that grace, back to the head of his column, and he raised his hand, and the column, the guard, the wives, the lesser members, the silent and now visibly shaken Caius, the pale and watchful Marcus, assembled itself around him, the way it had assembled itself 2 hours before in the trees. Felix did not, however, fall in with them. He stood alone, halfway across the meadow in his white cloak with his fist still loose at his side, and he looked at Arrow and he looked at Harry and he did not move. "Felix," Arrow said mildly. "Master," Felix said. "Are you coming?" A pause. "In a moment, master." Arrow looked at him for a long beat. Then, with a small inclination of his head, the smallest concession he had made all day, he turned away, and the column moved in its perfect formation back through the snow toward the trees and was gone. The clearing, for some minutes, did not move. Then, with the small, soft sigh of a body who had been holding herself very still, Bella let her shield fall. Renesmee, who had not been afraid the entire morning, climbed off her mother's hip, walked across the snow on her own small feet and came to Harry and put her hand against his hand. She did not, this time, show him anything. She only held his hand. Heidi, who had been asleep on her side in the snow for the duration of the battle, stirred. Harry, very gently, leaned down and ran his wand over her temple, and she opened her eyes and looked up at him and lay still. "You are all right," he said softly. "Get up, go after them, I have not hurt you." She got up. She looked at the trees where her column had vanished. She looked at Felix, who was still standing in the meadow. She looked at Harry and she did not speak, and after a moment she walked, alone, in the direction her column had gone, and was also gone. Felix did not, all that long afternoon, follow her. He stood instead in the meadow in his white cloak with his fist at his side. He stood there as the witnesses on both wings began, slowly, to settle. He stood there as Vladimir and Stefan came up to Harry, very gravely, and bowed to him in the precise old Romanian way. He stood there as the wolves came in from the perimeter and changed, in the trees, and Jacob, who had killed no one by careful instruction, came across the snow on his bare brown feet and gathered Renesmee up off Harry's hand and onto his shoulder. He stood there as the witnesses began in their separate clusters to leave. He stood there, in fact, until the meadow was empty of everyone but the Cullens and Harry and himself. "Sir," he said finally in his deep, slow voice. "Yes, Felix. I do not know where to go. You have a few choices." Harry said, "I would like, sir, to be one of those choices." Harry, who had not been expecting the request, considered. He looked at Carlyle, who had come up beside him without his noticing, and he saw in Carlyle's face the small, gentle, expectant readiness of a man whose house had always had room for one more. "Come back with us," Carlyle said simply to Felix. "We will think about it together." Felix nodded. He came across the meadow on his great quiet feet. He fell in with the small, courteous, dazed dignity of a man who had, this morning, lost his entire home and gained, at the same time, the possibility of a new one. He walked with them at the back of their column, all the way out of the clearing. Behind them, the snow began, very softly, to fall again on a meadow that had, in the next 1,000 years, very few storms left to weather. Chapter 9 and Chapter 10. After light the snow fell that night and the next day in the slow, settled way of snow that had decided finally to commit. By the morning of the second day after the meadow, the woods around the Cullen house lay under a thick, clean white, and the cedars, weighted with it, had taken on the quiet, held look of trees that had been told they could rest. Harry had not, since the parley, gone far from the house. He had gone, the first morning after, alone into the meadow, and he had walked the snow where the Volturi had stood, and he had laid down a small charm at the precise place where Caius had crouched on Carlisle in the snow, so that the place, for some years, would refuse to grow anything that did not also wish to grow there. He had walked back to the house through the trees on his own, and he had come in the front door, and Renesmee had handed him another mug of coffee without looking up from a book she had been pretending to read, and he had sat down by the fire and stayed there for the rest of the afternoon. The witnesses had begun, gradually, to leave. The Egyptians had gone first with a small, grave farewell. The Irish had stayed 2 more nights, helping Carlisle with a small project on the perimeter, and had then also gone. The Amazons had vanished one morning without telling anyone they were going, in the Amazon way, leaving only their thanks in a folded piece of paper on the kitchen counter. The nomads had drifted out one by one on their separate restless schedules. The Romanians had stayed. They had also, it seemed, decided to keep Felix. They had been, the first afternoon, in some doubt about him. Stefan, in particular, had spent 20 minutes with the man in the kitchen, asking small, sharp questions, while Felix had answered each of them with the slow, careful honesty of a man who had stopped, in the past 48 hours, knowing how to lie. By dinner, Stefan had given Felix his old, considered nod. By the second evening, Vladimir was teaching Felix to cheat at cards. The Romanians had not, in 1100 years, picked up an apprentice. They had, this week, decided to pick up 2. The other one was, in effect, Harry, although Harry had not exactly agreed to it and had not exactly refused. The Denali had stayed 3 days. They had left the morning of the 4th with embraces all around. Tanya had taken Harry's face in her hands at the door, the way Renesmee had done, and had looked at him for a long moment and had said, "If you ever come north, Mr. Potter, my house is yours." He had thanked her. He had thought, watching her go, that he might, for the first time in a long time, actually take a friend up on the offer. It was on the 5th morning that he began, gently, to make ready to leave. He did not announce it. He had never been good at announcing it, and he had had, in 146 years, many opportunities to practice. He simply began to gather in his rucksack the few things he had. The wand. The stone which he had decided to keep. He had decided, in the meadow, that he had been afraid of it for too long. A change of clothes. 2 books from Carlisle's library, which Carlisle had insisted on lending him, with a small, dry comment about how he would expect them back. A small folded note from Renesmee that he had, the day before, found tucked into his coat pocket without explanation. Renesmee, at the kitchen counter, looked at him. "You are going, soon. Today, tomorrow morning. Early, please don't fuss." She did not, of course, fuss. Renesmee had not fussed in 100 years. She did, however, very gently lay her hand on his hand on the strap of his rucksack and hold it there for a moment. "You will come back." "I will. You promise." "I promise." She nodded. She let his hand go. She turned very gently back to the small, ridiculous task she had set herself. She had been, the past 2 days, learning to make scones, on the theory that a wizard guest who would eat nothing else would at least eat a scone, and she did not, again, look at him. He spent the day in pieces with each of them. He went, after breakfast, with Carlisle into the study. The 2 of them had spoken, by then, of many things. They did not, in the morning, speak of anything in particular. They sat in the same 2 chairs they had sat in on the first night, and Carlisle had opened a book at random and read aloud from it in a low voice. It was the Marcus Aurelius, and Harry, who had not been read to since he had been a child, listened, his eyes closed. When the chapter was done, Carlyle closed the book. "You will in the years to come be welcome in this house," he said. "I know, in any house I am ever in, I know. You will also be welcome to come in winter. We have, despite the Pacific Northwest's reputation, a great deal of fire." Harry laughed. It was again a small, surprised laugh. He laughed more in this house than he had in a long time. "I am grateful to you," he said. "I am grateful to you. I think, in fact, that grateful is not strictly the word. It is not. It is, however, the one we have. It will do." He went after lunch with Bella. They walked together up the river behind the cottage to a place where the trees parted and there was a long, slow view across the water to a stand of older fir on the far bank. They stopped there. They did not, for a few minutes, speak. "I will write to you." Bella said, "Will you? You will give me an address." "I do not have an address exactly. I will give you a name. There is a man in Marrakesh who will know how to find me. I will also write you. I will leave you the means to read what I write. They are not, I should warn you, what you are used to. Show me." He took out of his pocket a small folded square of parchment. He unfolded it. He held it up. It was blank. He took the wand from his sleeve and tapped it once. Words began in a slow, deliberate, looping hand to appear on the parchment from the top down. "Bella, my friend," she inhaled, surprised. He smiled. "It is paired," he said. "I will keep the other half. You will not need to do anything to read it. What I write on mine will appear on yours. To write back, you tap with the small object I will leave you. I will send you a list of the people whose mail I am inclined to read. Yours will be at the top. Thank you." He folded the parchment. He handed it to her. She did not, for a moment, take it. She looked at him, and her gold eyes were the kind of gold that, on a vampire, was the closest a vampire could come to weeping. She took the parchment, finally, and tucked it into her pocket, and she came forward, and she very gently kissed him on the cheek. "I do not know," she said, "what I would have done if you had not come. You would have done well. You did do well. You would have done, in the worst case, what I will tell you you should do if I had not come, which is this. When you have lived long enough, you forget that you are surrounded by people you love. The forgetting is a slow forgetting. It is the only thing about being immortal that it is in your power to fix. I have, in the last week in your house, remembered. You will remember as long as you can, and when you forget, and you will, sometimes, you will tell each other. That is, in the end, the only practice that matters." She nodded. They walked back along the river in silence. He went, after that, to find Edward. Edward was at the piano. He was playing, very softly, a piece Harry had never heard. It was thoughtful and slow and unfinished. Harry could tell that it was unfinished because Edward kept stopping in the middle of it and trying alternatives, and Harry came in and sat down on the stool at the corner of the room by the bookcase and listened. "You are leaving," Edward said without stopping playing, "in the morning. Where will you go?" "East. There is a man in Sweden who has been writing me for a year. I have been ignoring him. I will, this winter, go and listen to what he has to say. And in the spring I will come back. Bella will be glad. And you?" Edward stopped playing. He folded his hands on the keys. He looked at them. "I am bad at this," he said. "You are not. I am very bad at it. I have had over a century to practice, and I have not made any progress. I will say it anyway because I had decided this morning that I would. I am sorry, Harry, for the man I was when you walked into my home, for the man I was for the first 3 days in particular, for the way I looked at you and for the way I expected the worst of you. I had, by the end of the week, stopped expecting the worst of you. I had begun, in fact, to be very glad you were under my roof. I will not insult you by pretending I started there. You did not insult me by starting where you started. Perhaps not. I insulted myself. I have done that also. We will not, between the two of us, be too hard on either of us about it." Edward smiled. It was the wide, helpless smile of a man who had finally let himself like something. "You are," he said, "a piece of work. So I have been told. Will you let me play you something before you go?" "Yes." He played. He had, in the week, written it for Harry. It was the unfinished piece. It was, Harry thought afterward, the only piece of music he had ever been written, and it was the only piece of music a man with Edward Cullen's gift had ever been able to write that had not, in some way, been about Bella. It was about a man Harry had not, before this week, known he was. He listened. He had, by the end of the piece, to look out the window for a long time because the window did not, at the moment, want anyone looking at his face. After supper, a meal which only Renesmee and Jacob ate, as always, and which Esme had nonetheless laid as if for a state dinner, he went out onto the porch. Renesmee was already there. She was wrapped in a small dark coat and her hair was loose and she was sitting on the top step and she had a small piece of paper in her lap. "You are leaving in the morning," she said. "Yes, I do not want you to, I know. You will come back. Yes, promise me." She did not look at him. She was unfolding the small piece of paper. "Promise me with the stone, Renesmee, please." He took the stone out of his pocket. He looked at it. He looked at her. He set the stone very gently against her small palm. "I promise," he said. "On the 2nd of 3 I will come back." She held the stone for a moment. She closed her hand around it. Then she opened her hand and she set the stone back in his palm and she closed his fingers around it and she did not, for a long moment, let go of his closed hand. "They love you," she said softly. "Tonks." The man with the kind eyes. "They have been telling me what to tell you all week. I have not had a chance." "Renesmee," Lupin says, "do not feel guilty for being alive. He says you have been, for 100 years, paying for a bill you do not, in fact, owe. He says it is enough, and that he is angry with you for trying to pay it for so long." Tonks says you were the best godfather a child could have asked for, and that Teddy thinks so too, and that they will all be there to shout at you when you finally come home, but not, please, for some years yet. Sirius says he is the one with the dark hair. He says you should fall in love again. He says it is past time. He says he is bored of waiting. Harry did not, for some moments, speak. "Did you tell my father also?" he asked quietly. "Did he say anything?" he said. Renesmee said with the careful, formal attentiveness of a child delivering a message exactly, "that he is proud of you. He said his name is James. He said your mother says she is proud of you. He said her name is Lily. He said they are both very proud of you and that they would like, very much, to meet me one day." He bent down then and gathered her up, small, warm, half vampire, half human, half something only she had ever been, and he held her against his chest for a long, unmeasured moment, and she let herself be held and Esme on the other side of the kitchen window. Very quietly turned away and did not let any of the others see her face. When he set her down again, she put her hand against his cheek and showed him last, a thing that was not a memory and not a hope but a kind of certainty. A clearing in the spring, with the snow gone and grass and the trees in their first green and a small round table on it, and around the table the Cullens and Felix in his white cloak, and the wolves at the trees, and Bella laughing at something Edward had said, and Harry himself with the wand in his sleeve and the stone in his pocket and the cloak, although she had not, before this, known about the cloak, folded over the back of his chair, sitting at the table among them. "Spring," she said. "Spring," he agreed. He left in the morning before the sun was up. He had said his goodbyes the night before. He did not, in his experience, do well at the morning kind. He walked out of the house with his rucksack on his shoulder, his coat collar turned up against the cold, and he walked down the long, muddy track to the road, and he walked along the road in the pre-dawn dark for some time, and he stopped eventually. At a bend where the trees thinned and gave way to a long, low view of the eastern sky, there was a faint, pale band on the horizon. It was the first promise of morning. He stood for a moment and watched it and did not, for once, feel the small old ache that mornings had begun in the past 20 years to give him. He took the small parchment from his pocket. He tapped it. A few words in the careful, familiar hand appeared on it from the top down. Esme, who had been sitting up all night writing letters at the kitchen counter, was already on her parchment. "We will see you in spring. We have all decided. You promised the child. We will hold you to it." He smiled. He folded the parchment. He put it back in his coat. He took the wand out of his sleeve lightly. He did not need to use it. He held it simply for company. He had not been a man who liked walking on his own in the mornings since he had been very young. He had grown in the past week slightly less alone. He set off down the road. Behind him, the woods of the Olympic Peninsula closed gently over his footprints in the snow. Above him, the sky lightened by a fraction of a degree at a time. Ahead of him, in some part of the world where he had not yet been, there were people to meet and conversations to have and small, quiet things to do and, at the end of the long arc of the year, a clearing in spring and a table and a chair and a child who had, the night before, told him she was looking forward to meeting his mother. He walked in the cold with the small, particular smile of a man who had begun, against all his expectations, to look forward to coming back.